My name is Tim McCarthy, Boston City Council for District 5. I'm the chair of the City Council Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. I'm joined by my colleague and sponsor, Councilor Matt O'Malley, as well as Councilor Ed Flynn. Today's docket number is 0624, and Councilor Janey. 0624. Councilors O'Malley and Councilor Janey offered the following order. It's a hearing to address violence and community engagement in the summertime in the city of Boston. I want to remind everybody that this is a public hearing. It'll be recorded and broadcast on Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964. And it's also being streamed online at cityofboston.gov. Please silence all your cell phones and other devices. We will take public testimony midway through the hearing. I'd appreciate it if you could sign in and check off the box for a yes to testify. And when you do arrive at the microphone, please state your name and affiliation, your residence, and if you could limit your comments to just a couple minutes, as we'd like to have everybody heard. So without further ado, both co-sponsors, Councilor O'Malley and Councilor Janey, are here. So I'd like to turn it over to Councilor O'Malley at this time. Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all who have joined us this afternoon. I want to begin by thanking my dear colleague and friend, District 7 City Councilor Kim Janey, for her partnership and her leadership on this issue. We'd been talking, several weeks ago about challenges that are unique to every city during the summer as the temperature rises, so too do certain crime statistics. So we want to make sure preemptively and proactively that we're able to work with the men and women of the Boston Police Department, our trauma centers, Boston Center for Youth and Families, all the relevant stakeholders, and most importantly, hear from the members at large, hear from the public about some of their concerns. We've already seen some incidents happen. On May 4th, there was a double homicide within my district at the Mildred Haley Apartments. There were two victims, Christopher Joyce and Claiborne Blair, and it's obviously devastating and incredibly traumatic to the community. We're going to hear from some of my dear friends from Mildred Haley a little bit later. As recently as this past weekend, there was a quadruple shooting in Roxbury, and I know Councilor Janey was extraordinarily helpful in the aftermath. But we know that while we are a relatively safe city, obviously one major crime that is committed is going to have profound impacts. So we want to make sure that we have the resources, we have the tools, and we have the plan going forward. Now, what separates us from many other cities, I truly believe, is the professionalism and the effectiveness of the Boston Police Department. Our trauma teams are working with clergy and other stakeholders, as well as the Boston Public Health Commission, that are extraordinarily well prepared and incredibly supportive. I do think you all need more resources, and as a counselor, as we're in budget season, I want to make sure in the weeks ahead we're able to get you what you need. But I also want the purpose of this hearing is to have a conversation, hear from the public at large, and find ways that we can work better and work stronger together going forward. So once again, I'm looking forward to a great presentation. We have a couple panels, I believe, and then public testimony is going to be key as well. But wanted to thank all of you and the men and women who work with each and every one of you who do your part and do it exceptionally well each and every day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I certainly want to thank Councilor Matt O'Malley for your partnership on this important issue. Many thanks to the panel and all of those who have taken time out of your busy day to come. This is an important issue. It's a timely issue that we're having this hearing. I agree we certainly need more resources to deal with this issue. We also have to tackle this from, I think, several fronts. Definitely want to highlight and acknowledge the Commissioner, the Chief, and certainly you, Reverend Mark Scott. You mentioned the quadruple shooting that we saw Friday night, early Saturday morning, which happened on my street. And that is very traumatizing, certainly for me and certainly for my neighbors. I appreciate the quick response from you and people of your team. After I called the police through 911, reached out to you directly, you were on the scene. I stayed out there till about 2 a.m. and the detectives were still out there after I went inside. And then the next day had the the opportunity to join Reverend Mark Scott and the trauma team and street workers, reaching out to my neighbors with some resources and support. I'm concerned that this is an uptick that we're seeing, and so I think it's important that we are proactive and that we're having this conversation, but more important that we follow up the conversation with concrete action. So thank you again for your work on this issue, all of you. Thank you for being here. And I should also mention that there were street workers from Boston Center for Youth and Families, so thank you, Chief, and Will, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, and thank you for your work, and Councilor McCarthy and Councilor Janey as well. I'm glad to sign on to this important order. I'm looking forward to hearing from the professionals. As a probation officer for the last 10 years, I had the opportunity to work almost every day with the Boston Police, and I've seen up close the dedicated professional men and women on the Boston Police. They work hard, they represent our city well, and I know they're doing a lot of outstanding work on community policing issues across the city. I see it in the South End at Villa Victoria, I see it in South Boston. In Chinatown, I speak almost every day to Captain Fong and Captain Boyle. But I'm also interested in hearing about what we can do better to improve, our outreach. Is there an opportunity to get more resources on the street? Is there an opportunity to hire more police? Is there an opportunity to hire more street workers? I have great confidence in the street workers. They know our city. They know our young people. I think that should be a big priority, is getting more street workers on the streets, giving them an opportunity to continue working hard, having a presence in public housing, and I think it goes a long way. Boston works best when we work together, and thank you to the panel for being here today, and thank you for working closely with us.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. So at this time, I'll turn it over to the highest ranking officer across the table, Commissioner Evans. Welcome, Commissioner. Thanks for being here.
Inviting us to this meeting. I appreciate it. Obviously, summertime and our activity picks up. We're here to talk about what we've seen so far this year, what we've seen in past summers, and the strategy, that we are taking. I know Mayor Walsh, early in May, first week of May, we had a violence meeting on summer strategy, and we had all the partners in the room talking about what we all can do to make this a safer summer, and I thought that meeting went very well. And here we are, we're into the summertime. Clearly, last weekend was a busy weekend. I think we had 7 people shot. Obviously, Councilor, obviously I'm sorry what happened on your street. 4 young kids getting shot on our street is not something I like to be woken up to, as well as I'm sure you were quickly texting me when you heard the shots. So, that's the type of stuff we got to all work together so it's not happening on our streets during the summer. So at least, I hope making that arrest will help calm things down. And we're working on some strategies in and around your neighborhood right now, and hopefully that will help. So, but to start out, I have Jen Gillis here, who's just going to give you a snapshot of how summers have impacted the violence and give you an idea of how it's been from the beginning of this year to now, and how we're going to need everybody's help to make this city and this summer a safe one. So, Jen, if you want to walk us through.
Sure. Good afternoon. It's going to kind of set a baseline for what we've seen in past summers based on statistics and locations of violence. So let's see here. Oh, there we go. So when we talk about summer violence, statistically, we're talking June 1st through August 31st for that year. So all of these numbers here are comprised of that 3-month time frame over the summers going back to 2013. You can kind of see the shifts in violence, homicides range between 13. Last year, we did have a slight uptick for the summer months with 18 homicides. Other Part 1 crime categories over the summer last year actually decreased. But overall, we average about 1,000 to 1,500 Part 1 violent crimes over the summer months. Looking at shooting victims, again, these are for those same 3-month periods going back to 2007, so almost a 10-year look back. You can see over the summer we averaged 95 victims for that 3-month period. That averages out to about 1 victim a day when you're looking at those 3 months. Last year we were under that average with 89 victims for the summer months. You can see going back to 2007, 2008, 2011, we were over that threshold. The last couple years have kind of fluctuated between 84 up to 95 victims. So that's kind of the baseline that we've seen in the city in past years. When you compare fatal shootings versus non-fatal shootings, we've pretty much averaged between 10 and 15 fatal shooting victims for those summer months. Last year, that was a bigger percentage of our shooting victims. The 3 previous years, we had 10 each summer. And you can look back to 2011, a very active summer, 24 fatal shooting victims for that 3-month period. So those are kind of the numbers we've seen in the past again. And a lot of this is dependent on which feuds and groups are active at the time and kind of what the dynamic is in some of the more active neighborhoods. As far as non-fatal shootings, just last year compared to the previous year, we were up 9% in fatal shootings and 50% in non-fatal, or 50% in fatal, and 9% in non-fatal shootings. So not big number changes there, only 5 and 6 incidents respectively, 11 overall. So pretty stable numbers that we've seen in past years. When you look at when the crime is happening, most of it occurs during the first half shift, which is the 4 to 11 p.m. shift, the majority of the activity. When you're looking at days of the week, Sunday nights and Monday nights were actually very active last summer. A lot of the activity is after bars and clubs let out and around late night party activity. So in those early morning hours between 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. the next morning on the weekends, but more towards the end of the weekend, Sundays, Mondays, tend to be more active. Holiday weekends are also a concern. In the past, we have had significant activity around 4th of July holiday weekend. Last year in particular, we had 15 people shot in 10 incidents during the 4th of July weekend. That's Friday through Monday, which is one of the most active years that we've had. Other holidays, Memorial Day and a Caribbean Fest weekend tend to be active weekends, though last year and in recent years, they haven't been as active. Looking back to 2011, 2010, those were kind of our more active time frames surrounding those holidays. And again, a lot of that violence, a lot of the weekends with large victim counts are usually parties, people in close groups, and that's when we get the multiple victim shootings and those high counts for weekend violence. So that's kind of what we've seen in the past there. As far as where the violence is happening, these are the hot spots for last summer. I know this is kind of hard to see, but pretty much starting in the south end around Lenox, hitting a couple neighborhoods in Roxbury, Bromley Heath area in JP, down into Dorchester, Bowdoin, Geneva, and kind of Upham's Corner area, and then a few areas down into Lower Dorchester and Mattapan. Franklin Field included. So that's kind of where the violence was last summer. A lot of these are historical hotspots that we've been talking about for a very long time, but all kind of have active groups and dynamics going on in those neighborhoods as well. As far as where we are this year, we're down 16 shooting victims and down 15 shooting incidents compared to the same time frame last year. We are up in just postpone this here. We are up in shooting homicides slightly, but all other categories are down. Right now, our 5-year average, so the average number of shooting victims at this point in the year, going back 5 years, is 86, so we're slightly below that as well. And kind of looking at month-over-month trends, we're at 13 victims so far in June of this year. An interesting note about this year is we had a very active December, which is not characteristic. Usually winter months are a lot quieter, and then activity kind of dropped off, and we're just starting to see that pick up again in the last couple weeks. So not every year looks the same. Usually we see June, July, August with the large spikes, but this year's been a little bit more consistent across the board. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the Commissioner.
Thanks, Jen. And you can see by these numbers, obviously we really do deploy up for the summer. And by the locations, that's where we put most of our resources. So when you look at those hotspots, and we had a crime meeting this morning with all our command staff and all our captains, we focused on, and we do this every Wednesday, and we do it every 2 weeks, on where our resources have to be. So, Jen Gillis and the regional intelligence, that's what they do. They supply us this information, and that's how we deploy to stop the violence. And, what you clearly see there is the summer we pick up. When the mayor had his meeting a month ago, I laid out a lot of our plans, and a lot has to do with the partnerships, both working with the trauma team here, as well as all our community partners. Over the last couple of weeks, I met with Josh Kraft and all the directors of all the Boys and Girls Clubs, working with them in our offices to get these kids into camps and get them into programs in the summer and keep them busy. I met with James Morton from the YMCA, similar. They offer free camps to free memberships to every kid in the city all throughout the summer. They have a lot of great summer camps that we're trying to get local kids who really need them, especially around the developments, into those camps. So we work closely with them. Obviously, we do the teen police academies, we do the junior police academies. We do quite a bit to try to keep the kids busy and keep them focused on positive things, to keep them away from the guns. Year to date, we're close to almost getting 300 guns off the street. And I've always said there's way too many guns on the street. That's what keeps me awake. I know the mayor is very concerned about it, but, just this morning we did a search warrant on Rosamond Street, the drug unit, and they got, 2 guns, both of them in a cocked position inside laundry. So thank God when our officers found them, they didn't go off. Well barricaded home, and we got an AR-15 as well as 2 handguns out of that house this morning. So that's the good thing is the neighbors afterwards were all coming up thanking us for what we did down there. We also got a gun on a drug raid early this morning. We got one on Columbia Road yesterday, one on Washington Street, 2 the day before. So within a couple of days, there's 7 guns off the street. So, we're trying our best to get the guns off the street, but the bigger issue, I think, is how they're getting them. And we talked about how, 20% of the guns we get are from New Hampshire and Maine, and a lot of them are from the I-95 South Corridor. But as quick as we take these guns off the street, they're in the hands of these young kids. And I think you've seen on Copeland Street, on at the Burger King up on Cummings Highway, Elder Street. Last weekend we had 7 people shot. And it's not from a lack of effort on us trying to get the guns. It just seems to be a large supply continually flowing into our streets, and younger kids. And, I know Anthony Braga is going, he studies this stuff. And one of the things he's finding, and he works with Northeastern, is we're down 17 shots, shootings this year, but the caliber of guns that these kids have are more powerful, and they're doing a lot more damage, and that's why we have a lot more deaths this year. The old 22-25 has been replaced by the 380s, and the 40 calibers and some of the so we're having more deaths because the guns are more powerful. But, we're trying our best out there to get these guns. And, on the screen, you can see all the program we do from, some people think it's silly, but the ice cream truck being out there with the community. We do the flashlight walks, Coffee with a Cop. This Sunday, if anyone's around, we have our Father's Day Walk for Peace. We started that 8 a.m. at Franklin Park. The Peace Walks. We had a bunch of Cape Verde officers in. They just left my office now. They were out there walking with us. Last night, Tuesday night at Boat in Geneva, we're out there trying to walk with the community. We have 30 new bikes that are ready to be deployed in all the district stations. So we have the bike unit, but we're we're going to have 3 additional bikes in every station to put out, which will be helpful. So we're doing a lot of good visibility out there. We're involved in all the kids' camps, all the kids' programs. We're continually out there trying to make a difference. What we need, honestly, is the community's help to make this a safe summer. You know, I don't know what else we can do. We need everyone in this city to step up and help us, because obviously these kids are getting guns younger and younger, and, you know, we see them using them. And so, you know, I don't know how we are the only solution on that. I'm glad to see a lot of community members here, because this is a comprehensive, it has to be a comprehensive approach, because, you know, we're trying our hardest, believe me, but we're facing the warm summer months where traditionally violence has gone up in our city. And, you know, that's the challenge. Where we have done a lot better, I think, in, you know, Marty Martinez and Reverend Scott to talk to, is dealing with the trauma after these events, because I think we've always neglected the trauma and what it does to our communities. And I think Mayor Walsh has done a good job bringing on these trauma teams, because when I'm out there, I see the mothers, I see the young kids, and I realize that's going to have a lasting impact on them. I know Councilor Cheney was out there the other night. There's a lot of community members who have to witness that and live with it. So I think the trauma piece has been a real important addition to what we do, because there's lasting impact from the violence. So with that, I'll end and see if there's questions, or we can put it to the trauma teams.
We'll go right on down to Chief Martinez. Welcome. Good to see you again, Marty.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman McCarthy and Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Janey, and Councilor Flynn. Thank you for having this important conversation. I'm only going to speak briefly from a Health and Human Services perspective, and then have colleagues here from both Mark Scott from the Neighborhood Trauma Teams, managing from the Health Commission, and then Commissioner Morales from BCYF, all of which are an important part of sort of our summer strategy. You know, when you think about violence prevention, we're the city, as we think about public safety and we think about sort of intervening and dealing with some of the issues on that side, we're also always focused, and you can hear this from Commissioner Evans' remarks, on prevention and thinking about all the array of prevention things that we're doing that kind of live in a public health sphere. And so that includes thinking about all the challenges, from jobs to programming to our teen centers to more resources. And so I'm going to highlight a couple things, but then we're going to talk a little bit around our trauma and our BCYF space. As always, we think a big part of our prevention is our summer jobs program. Again, we're employing over 3,000 young people through the city, 11,000 total with our private sector. Important to remember the Division of Youth Employment and Engagement is also employing young people in a variety of organizations that are in our community centers that are in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, all across the city, making sure young people not only have jobs and have an opportunity, but also have some meaningful opportunities. So we're talking about connecting them to mentors in partnership with some of our mentoring programs. We're talking about connecting them to learn and earn college credit programs through Bunker Hill Community College, some financial literacy support through John Hancock, making sure that a job in itself isn't just it, but that it's connected to other meaningful opportunities. So the Summer Jobs Program, as you all know, the Mayor's Summer Jobs Program, committed to ensuring not only are we engaging young people, but also, once again this year, engaging young people who may have other needs, who may be classified as higher risk, giving them additional resources, connecting them to wraparound supports and services. You know, it's not just enough to give a young person a job for the summer, but how do you connect them to additional resources and opportunities? And so the Summer Jobs Program is really focused to try to do that this year, and a part of that DYE effort. In addition, what we've tried to do is make sure that we're looking at the data. And so you saw the data that Jen shared from the BRIC, and this is the second time from the May meeting where we've seen this data. So what Health and Human Services did, and I think it's important moving from data to action, what we did in the past couple weeks is bring together BCYF, the Boys and Girls Club, the Y, and a few community centers in 6 of the hotspot neighborhoods. So we looked in Dudley, Lenox Street, Upham's Corner, Fields Corner, Grove Hall, and Heath Street. And we said, okay, what is BCYF doing in those neighborhoods? What's the Boys and Girls Club? What's the Y? What are these community-based groups doing? Really focused on prevention. Wasn't focused on policing or public safety. It was really who's running programming for teens and young adults. And so we brought together these organizations, asked them to tell us what they're doing, what the gaps are that they see in the neighborhoods, where could they use more resources. Because again, it's great to have the data, but it's really important to take that data and figure out how to create resources to sort of counter some of that. And so one of the things that we did is look at what those gaps were. And those gaps aren't going to surprise any of the counselors or the public. There was gaps identified in more resources to reach girls, to better serve young girls in the community, more resources to bring community groups together within gatherings and barbecues, things that sometimes when we think about public safety issues, we might not think that's important, but it's tremendously important for people to connect with each other. And so that was identified as a gap. Incentives to deal with transportation to keep youth safe after programs and after events, as well as looking at trying to think about some of those high-risk times and how do we provide resources to take young people out of the community so they can experience things outside of Boston, field trips, a variety of different opportunities for street workers to be able to engage some of the young men and young women that they're working with. And so I share those conversations because what we did is assess what those gaps are, use the data from the police department in terms of these hotspot areas, and then now we're going to make some investments. We're going to come up with some dollars through Summer Fund to be able to do some of the things we identified as gaps, so some of the prevention programming can exist and is there. In addition, as you all know, the mayor has committed summer grants. Once again, this year, over $200,000 of funding through BCYF is going to over 80 different organizations in every neighborhood in the city. These are organizations that they're charged with enhancing or growing their programming to better serve young people with an emphasis in young adults and teens, thinking about trauma, thinking about how do you ensure the diversity of the neighborhoods are met. This year, for the first time, we created a new category called transformational grants, which were bigger amounts. They were $12,000 just for the summer, so that programs, Hawthorne Youth Center in Roxbury and the Boston Project Ministries in Dorchester got these grants, and they were meant to better reach a harder to serve population with more dollars, not smaller dollars, but what does it look like over the summer to create these resources and opportunities. And so again, from a health and human services place, we have to work collaboratively with public safety, but we also have to figure out how do we create prevention programs on the ground that are not only impactful, but that we can measure results and impact. And so that's really the lane that we're in health and human services. But it's clear as part of this work, the work that the trauma teams do to kind of deal with the aftermath is critically important and to prevent other violence, but also the work that BCYF is doing across the city in our 36 facilities. So I'm going to ask Reverend Mark Scott to sort of tell us a little bit about what's happening with the trauma work for the summer and its effort to build up its resources.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Scott. I am the Director of Trauma Response and Recovery at the Boston Public Health Commission. Thank you, Chairman McCarthy, and also thank you to Councilors Janey and O'Malley for filing the order and having us here today. In my role, I manage the Neighborhood Trauma Teams, or NTT, to help coordinate services for individuals, families, friends, communities impacted by community violence. The work also focuses on the critical aspects of recovery. Boston is actually fortunate to have a tremendous group of partners that are committed to preventing and addressing the root causes of violence through a public health approach, especially those who are seated here with me at the table. Additionally, our healthcare community understands the need to provide strong trauma support and services to victims. Our schools understand the value of teaching children skills to foster social emotional wellness. Community-based organizations understand how they contribute to building trust and cohesion in our neighborhoods. Most importantly, our residents are eager to engage in every aspect of building peace in the city of Boston. Based on information gathered from 14 community sessions in the summer of 2016, the Health Commission designed a program to support a network of citywide and neighborhood-based trauma response and recovery services. That's the program we call the Boston Neighborhood Trauma Team Network. The trauma teams link community health centers with community-based organizations in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Jamaica Plain, and East Boston to provide comprehensive trauma support services to residents impacted by community violence. So in Dorchester, it's the Bowden Street Health Center and the Greater Four Corners Action Coalition. Roxbury, Whittier Street Health Center, Madison Park Development Corporation. Mattapan Community Health Center, Mothers for Justice and Equality. Jamaica Plain, Brigham and Women's Hospital, Southern Jamaica Plain Community Health Center, Martha Elliott Community Health Center, Brookside Community Health Center, and Jamaica Plain Tree of Life. East Boston Community Health Center, North Suffolk Mental Health, and Maverick Landing. As well, there is the Boston Trauma Response Team, JRI, or Justice Resource Institute, that is a citywide team that is mobile, that provides crisis response services, short-term case management, and provides additional support to the neighborhood trauma teams as needed. It's the JRI team, Boston Trauma Response, that staffs the 24/7, 365 hotline that is available for residents to call when they're impacted by community violence. So this network of community organizations work together to provide a continuum of services to the individuals, their immediate family and friends, those impacted by violence, as well as outreach, community support, referral services, and education to the broader community. One of the tools we use for education is a brochure that we work to make as available across the city as possible. I really urge people to actually read it because there's information in it that will help people understand what trauma is, how it's impacting their ability to go forward with their life, and what they can do about it, and then who to call for help. So it's a useful tool, as well as behavioral health services and related support services that allow people to move into long-term ongoing support. So again, the services that we're providing are access to the 24/7 hotline, immediate crisis response, referral to ongoing behavioral health services for individuals and families in need of ongoing long-term support, trauma support during a scene, a vigil, a funeral as families requested, support for neighborhood outreach and education, trauma education and support at community meetings, neighborhood association meetings, and then coping groups and healing groups. Thanks to Mayor Walsh's FY19 budget, the Boston Public Commission has additional resources to be able to expand the network to add an additional team. So we'll go from 5 teams to 6 teams. As well, we're going to have a cohort that will be managed by the JRI Boston Trauma Response Team, a cohort of 20 people, 20 on-call trauma responders. And this will increase our ability to respond to shooting scenes and homicides as they occur throughout the summer and going forward. The team, this cohort, will begin training on Monday, June 18th. The trauma network then also has to partner with a larger system of services in the city of Boston. So that would include other programs in the Boston Public Health Commission. That very much includes the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, certainly the police, BCYF, street workers, Boston Medical Center, the other hospitals that are in the city, particularly those that see trauma patients, and then other community-based organizations. So it's the network that allows us to be able to reach and serve the community. This will be our second summer working together as a network. So we will continue to build on lessons learned. We will continue to work to increase awareness in the community about the network and how to access the services. The health centers, community-based organizations, the other partners that lead this work are trusted anchors in their communities, and we hope to build on their expertise as we continue to learn and grow. So let me again thank you for convening this conversation and the work that we'll be able to do together going forward.
Thanks, Reverend. Thanks very much. Will Morales, how are you? Good to see you all.
I'm great. Thank you, councilors, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to speak about the important work that we do at Boston Centers for Youth and Families. Keeping our young people safe and engaged and healthy in fun activities during the summer is a major priority for the mayor, for Health and Human Services, and BCYF. We operate a network of over 30 community centers, 18 pools, and 1 beach, and summer is our busiest season, with an average of 2,300 youth enrolled in programs each day and a couple of thousand more in daily drop-in programs and activities. One of the summer statistics that I shared with you last month during the budget hearing was that we served about 5,100 young people last year in 301 programs, and meaning that we had direct contact with them over 87,000 times last summer. Clearly, we are serving a lot of youth, but there's always a need to serve more youth, with a strong emphasis on prevention, but most importantly, on building relationships with them. I am proud and very proud of the fact that we offer these programs at very low or no cost options for families and for youth. Since our Summer Guide program came out in March, we have worked hard to make sure that the people who are in need of these services are really directly connected and engaged. So we've been actually intentionally making connections with other groups to ensure that if families are not aware about what we offer, to make sure that they know and that they can come through our doors. And we do this to make sure that if any family that came through our doors, if there was an issue of cost, that cost would not be the preventing factor from having them participate in our program. And so I've brought copies of our summer guides for you to have and share, especially as you do your rounds in your districts. Some of the examples of some of the programs that we run at BCYF are licensed day camp programs that we do in partnership with volunteer councils, using our sort of ACES framework model, using the arts, community, civic engagement, leadership, and education and sports. We served over 3,000 youth in our camp programs, meaning that we had a host, about 40 camps that were all operable throughout the summer months. The more lately, and in the last couple of years, we've had a special emphasis to make sure that we include homeless youth who sometimes don't get the access to these services. And we have to thank partnerships with associated grant makers who continue to provide some scholarship dollars to serve this population, but also to connect us with the organizations that are serving the youth families to make sure that they realize that we have these programs available to them. We also have the Boston Summer Fun Stops. BCF Summer Fun Stops are designed for youth between the ages of 8-14 who are not actively involved in it or enrolled in a traditional summer camp program. The program is structured for youth who are sort of in the kind of lost loop world in a way, meaning that the parents can't afford sometimes the cost, or sometimes they just don't need the care for the full day. They just need a place for the kids to kind of stop and be a part of it. All of these programs take place in our community centers outside adjacent parks or fields. BCYF Summer Stops operate Monday through Friday on a first-come, first-served basis, and at each of our sites we serve about up to 50 young individuals. One of the things that we learned, especially as we were doing our round robins around the summer grants, is that we continue to hear this particular theme about the girls. Sometimes when we think about violence, we just focus on the males, but sometimes we forget that there are young women sometimes will get caught up in that world, not intentionally. Sometimes it's just that, boy crazy or whatever the situation may be, they get caught up in something that might not be right for them. And one of the things that we have is our BCYF Girl Nights that happen during the July and August months. BCYF Girl Initiatives will offer free events throughout the city of Boston to multiple girls. And then on top of it, we have a BCYF Girls Leadership Corps that engages girls between the ages of 13 and 15 as peer leaders to develop and support gender-specific programming, lead community service project, and engage their peers and school-age girls in workshops, activities that address the issues that young women face in our city. On top of that, we have the BCYF Snapshot program, which is a photography program for some older kids between the ages of 16 to 18. We realize that young people have a sort of a desire to actually look at the media arts, and photography is a great way for them to kind of connect to that. And so we have we actually utilize these young people to be staff photographers in many of our BCYF activities or events, block parties, and then hopefully if there's any other city events, they tend to go out and kind of practice the craft that they're developing during the summer months. BCYF also has the Super Teens program, which is a pre-employment program. It's catered for youth between the ages of 13 and 14. These are the kids that are too cool for camp, but still too young for summer jobs. They're in the in-between years, and what it does, it's sort of a pre-employment program, and it focuses on really a strong curriculum to have them develop a little bit their networking skills, but most important, to understand what it takes to actually to get a job and secure a job. Focus on the AAA kind of methodology, meaning that attire, attendance, and attitude mean a whole lot when you're actually looking for work. And so it's a great opportunity for us to work, connect with young people at a different age, and hopefully create the pipeline to get them connected to Success Link later in the future. And lastly, I want to mention our street worker program. The BCYF street worker program has been in existence for over 30 years. It was developed to assist in redirecting the lives of Boston's most vulnerable population. The program works with the most active 45 groups in the city of Boston, with an average caseload of 745 proven high-risk teens and young adults. And many of these youth are court or system involved and are impacted daily by a cadre of various life issues. And hopefully, through the relationship building that we have there, part of what we try to do is hopefully move them along the continuum into a very more healthy lifestyle. And so that's it for us in regards to prevention. I mean, the chief did a great job of stealing a lot of the thunder, so, and elaborating on a lot. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Thanks very much, Will. Just for the record, we've been also joined by Councilor Campbell. She's been out a couple of times, and Councilor Edwards as well. And last but certainly not least, Conan Harris. Good afternoon, Conan. How are you?
Hello, Counselor. First, I just want to say thank you for bringing together this convening. I want to thank the community members that are here. This is an important issue that is relevant to our city, and especially during our summer months. As you heard from my colleagues, we're very resource-rich in this city. There's nothing more I can say too much about the resources. One of the things I will add is that the mayor has brought about our office to convene a lot of the folks that are handling these resources throughout the city. So the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, headed by the Director Dan Mohern, we convene a lot of our partners once a month, not just during the summer months, but once a month throughout the year to go over the data that Jen just presented earlier around the shootings that exist in our city and what are we doing about it. In different hot areas, we look at those things more strategically, and we get together smaller groups to figure out how we can better support the issues around trauma, around violence in those particular areas. Understanding that July 4th is one of our most dangerous days of the year, we looked at how do we make sure that within our Operation Exit and our collaboration with the building trades, how do we make sure that we're convening young men from those hot areas for those areas that are most violent in the up-and-coming summer months to make sure that they're involved in pro-social programming to give them real opportunities so they can have a pathway out. And so we just started our 4th class, and it will be going on past July 4th to make sure that they're going through the training process. So it will give them some incentive to make sure that they're not in no violence throughout the summer months, but they're in an opportunity that can change their life forever for the better. One of the things I think is important to note is that anything we do, we're only as strong as our partnerships with community. We can do as much as we want to do here as a city and our agencies and the programs that we develop, but we're no good if we don't have community partners and community at the forefront of everything that we do. That's why this important conversation needs to happen. I just want to say also is that I think that we do really good as a city as figuring out what resources to put forth. I think the things that we can stronger and get better at is making sure some of these voices from the community, as we continue to collaborate, can figure out where could they fit in at, because I won't say community doesn't step up. In a lot of ways they do. We see it through the social media platforms and sometimes in conversations, harsh ones that they have with me. But I think that what we could do better is figure out ways to be collaborative together and to move the needle forward.
Thank you very much, Conan. I'll just hand it right over to Councilor O'Malley for now. We'll go to the first round of questioning. Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for that very thorough presentation. Councilor Janey and I specifically didn't want this to be a panel of Boston Police First, because it's not just about, as we address root causes and ways to address summer violence, it's not just about the police officers, it's about this collaborative approach. BCYF, Health and Human Services, My Brother's Keeper, everybody working together. So thank you all. Just briefly, Commissioner, a couple weeks ago I did a ride-along, as I do fairly regularly, with Captain Jack Danilecki, and 2 guns were taken off the streets that night during the couple hours I was riding with him. They were both handguns, and it was great. And your statistic that 300 guns have been taken off the street year to date is impressive and is great. What is chilling to me is that you said an AR-15 was among those guns just the other day. For those that don't know, that's a semi-automatic rifle. It can fire a lot of rounds in a very short period. It was what was used in Parkland shooting last month or 2 months ago. So, and that's a concern because while we have pretty strict, I would hope they would be more strict, gun laws in the Commonwealth, they don't have them in Maine or New Hampshire or Vermont, which can often flood in. So have you seen an increase in sort of the military-style assault weapons on our streets? Or was that an anomaly to find an AR-15?
Well, year to date, we haven't seen a whole lot more, thank God. You know, I think there's a ban on assault rifles here, so, but, you know, we haven't seen a whole, knock on wood, we haven't seen a whole lot, but it troubles me, you know, that we're seeing so many high-powered semi-automatic handguns in the hands of a lot of young kids out there. And, you know, even in this search warrant, it bothers me that when they found these two guns, they were in piles of laundry already cocked with the whole idea, well, lucky my officers weren't shot, when those were all ready to go off to anyone who found them, the way they were set up in the clothes. And, you know, thank God, you know, they weren't hurt early this morning when they did that search warrant. That was sort of like a booby trap for whoever found them. So that's troubling to me, but, you know, sometimes that's some of the danger we face out there. And, but at the same time, I commend the neighbors. They were out there and they were thanking us. Obviously, they knew that was a trouble house. And, you know, if anyone else out there knows of trouble houses that might be impacting, such as, you know, a house on Copeland Street where we've had a lot of violence, 73 Charles Street is another one. I talked to Jerome Smith about doing what we can do to help clean up these sort of hotspot houses. And, you know, that's what's troubling to me. You know, I hate to see these young kids getting shot, and obviously, you know, we all can do effort to make it hopefully stop.
Yeah. And to the, you know, fatalities and non-fatalities, 6 additional fatalities from this time last year, 22 fewer non-fatalities. Why is that? That seems, so to go from 13 to 19 is a 46% increase. 6 is 46% of 13. To go from 80 to 58% is a 30% decrease. Is it that the people are using more high-powered guns? Is it that an issue in terms of EMS not being able to respond in time? I'm just, it's not a huge number,
right.
But it's enough that it's
No,
sort of...
and I think I said it. I know, you know, and Anthony Braga is studying this now. He does a lot of work with Northeastern on this, and he has a paper coming out this week very much on this subject, how the higher the caliber is, the more likely death will result from the shot, and that's what his study will show. It's interesting because I had a doctor, Peter Mayorkas with Mass General, call me today when he seen these numbers, and he asked the same question to me this morning. I was talking to him, he said, does that mean these high-powered guns do more damage? And he sees it, and it's only reaffirming what he thought. So, you know, these 380s and the 40 calibers, and, you know, they're doing a lot more destructive damage once they hit the body. Plus, I think a lot of these, Matt, was a lot more up close and personal. A few basically almost assassinations. And also we had 5 stabbing deaths, which is unusual. We don't usually see that. So, you know, the good news is there's not as many people getting shot, but the bad news is we're seeing more people dying on us.
Yeah, very, very interesting. You said in your remarks, we need the communities to help us this summer. Can you, or maybe Superintendent, can you talk about ways that the community can anonymously report something, talk to someone? You know, I've often talked, particularly in Jamaica Plain, in E13, the community service officers are among the finest across the country. They know people, they get to know people, they build relations. Can you talk a little bit about the ways that the community can work perhaps better with BPD to, you know, address these and feel safe and build safer
Sure, the
cities?
communities can operate through the TIPS hotline if they want to be anonymous, 1-800-494-TIPS. Call in any information they have, be it violence, be it drugs, barking dog, anything, and they will be followed up and it'll be anonymous to them. They can just leave the information and move on. But if they establish a rapport with their community service officer, the beat officer, or anything like that, they can pass on that information to them. They can participate in it as much as they want to or as little as they want to, just to pass off the information, and we'll follow up on it.
That's great. Okay, good. I want to be mindful of my colleagues, so I'll jump around a little bit. Chief Martinez, you said, you talked about resources, a gap that exists now in terms of the study, the work you've done has been resources to bring people together to help. Are you talking specifically about sort of financial resources, better programmatic? Mm-hmm. How can the city help you? Is this working with nonprofits? Can you just expand on that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, providers understanding who's doing what. Right, to give you an example, so if a provider's like, in this neighborhood to target young people in Fields Corner, we're going to do this on Friday nights and this on Sunday nights, and understanding that another provider might be doing something on this night or another night, but there's a gap. No one's doing anything on Saturday, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's literally coordination and communication, and that's why we brought these providers together in these 6 specific neighborhoods. But other examples were money, right? So for example, the Boys and Girls Club in Dorchester, they give every young person who's there, they close I think at either 11 or midnight on Friday. Every young person who's there gets a ride home. And that's something they do. You have to do it for safety reasons and a variety of other reasons. But for example, the Y, if they had more resources, they would do that too, but instead they give people rides to the T-stops. Now the T-stop's a great transportation issue, but it's not as safe as getting a ride home. So I give you a real concrete example that providers are trying to make those decisions in the summer to figure out how do you engage young people, but then how do you keep them safe while you engage them at the same time. So our office was trying to, and is continuing trying to do, is how do we have better coordination? How do we try to put a little bit of dollars in through some of the summer fund dollars that we have? But also how do we figure out how to connect the dots to make sure that the young people who are most in need access these programs? You might have a group of 14, 15-year-olds in a neighborhood who are not going to go to the BC Wife Center. So how do we make sure that they go to another place or have access to another resource? So our office is trying to partner with all these great resources and lift up the coordination, the resources, and the gaps that exist, and then try to fill them. So that's the work we've been trying to do ever since we saw the data, but through the spring and into the summer.
Okay, great, thank you. Reverend Scott, you talked a little bit about sort of growing, should the council pass the mayor's budget later this month from 5 teams to 6 teams, sort of street teams out there working. Where will the 6th team be deployed, or will it be to just support the other areas?
It will be in Dorchester, and exactly where it ends up will be a sort of a public process, and the agencies that respond to the RFP that will release will determine the exact footprint of that team.
That's great, great. And then finally, Commissioner, you talked about 30, I believe it's 30 new bicycle officers will be in this year's budget?
Yeah.
And so there'll be 3 in every district?
Yeah, that's our hope. Yeah, we're supposed to be getting the bikes in this week, and so, that would be 3 that maybe we can, I always make sure now, obviously, after what happened in Heat Street, that we always have pedal bikes there, and so it'll give us the ability to put them out more. We have the citywide unit that respond, and they're in all the districts, but this will give the captain the ability to put him where
more
they
resources.
want.
And we're going to hear from some dear friends from Mildred Haley shortly, and I'd just like to publicly request that for the E13 allocation, we can have at least 1, if not 2, bicycle officers at Mildred Haley every day this summer.
Well, that's the hope. That's why we're putting them out there, because we seem to be pulling them from the pot. This will let the captain actually fix them to certain locations.
Excellent. And there is a great new Hubway station that abuts Mildred Haley, so it'll be great to maybe get some of the youth of Mildred Haley to learn how to ride bikes with the officers, with myself, with others this summer. So I look forward to that.
And,
Thank you, Mr.
we have a
Chairman.
bike ride for peace coming up in August. So again, as we get closer, we'll get that out, and maybe we can get a lot more people from the community to take a bike ride for us. We started that last year. It's a good way to reach out to a different audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have these walks for peace, and now we're going to have this the bike ride for peace.
That's great. Thank you.
I'd rather ride a bike than walk. Councilor Janey.
Thank you. Thank you to my colleague for pointing out that this is really about, partnership and how we all take responsibility and try to do more and to do better. for our community around these issues. I just want to take a moment, I thanked the panel earlier. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we have a lot of people in our audience today who are actively working on these issues. I know I saw Monica Cannon earlier. She, I guess, had to leave. James Mackey was here. James Hills is in the audience. We've got Pastor of St. John's, Art Gordon, who is doing work here. Certainly the minister, one of the ministers at 12th Baptist Church, Willie Broderick, who we'll hear from later. And I'm really grateful for 12th and all that they do in terms of their peace walks. We had representation from 12th Baptist Church in the trauma response team on Saturday. And certainly want to also acknowledge Liz Miranda, who's in the audience. She's the executive director of Hawthorne Youth Center in Roxbury. I know she knows this issue firsthand as well. One of my first questions when we came together as a team on Saturday was really, how do the people who respond to trauma deal with their own trauma? And, this is not a new issue in our city. This is not, we're looking at summer violence today, but clearly violence happens year-round. But I just wanted to focus here. This is not new to parts of Roxbury, certainly to Copeland Street. And so to hear this repeatedly over and over and over again, I know how it impacts me. And for people who then have to go and respond, I'm curious to just know and understand, how do we feed our own souls when we have to go out and help others? And perhaps, I don't know if you want to address that, Reverend Scott.
Yes, Counselor. Well, first of all, actually, thank you for your leadership on Saturday in general, but you were the one that asked that question of the people who were assembled to respond. And that was a very healthy dialogue, and that's a big part of how we do it. So you ask the question, what are you going to do to take care of yourself? And so we label it as self-care. But the step beyond that really is to create a culture of self-care where we're doing what you did. We're supporting one another and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves. One of the things we require of the team is to have a self-care plan for the members of the team. Another thing that we're doing and want to do more of is debriefing the incident, both operationally, but also in terms of a psycho-emotional. How are people doing? What are you doing to take care of yourself? One of our partners, actually the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, has really developed a tremendous amount of capacity for their staff, but they're willing to share a lot of the things they do, acupuncture, giving people time off, giving people actually giving their staff resources to be able to use it. They have to spend some money to go do things that will help with self-care. One of the things that we talk a lot about is water.
And you had water on Saturday, so thank you for that.
Water on Saturday, and the water actually makes a difference, slows you down, and then the water is refreshing and cleansing. So there's a whole lot of things and different things work for different people, just as trauma impacts everybody differently. What works for one person in terms of self-care won't work for the other person. So everybody has to sort of you have to have a plan and support in executing your plan around self-care.
Yeah, and I'm also grateful for the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute and for their work, so I'm glad that we'll hear from them later. I'm worried about what happens next. So, we have these incidents, Jamaica Plain, Roxbury, concentrated in certain areas, Dorchester. So what are the next steps? Just thinking about, again, the shooting on Copeland, that was Friday night, early Saturday morning, around midnight. The next day, so we know that the shooting victims are, in the hospital. Their families are worried. We went out that Saturday. The neighborhood, you can still see, even though, it's almost kind of back to normal in terms of people going about their business, but you see, bullet holes. You see the car that was shot up. And the car's sitting there for days on end as a trigger for folks who have to walk by it every single day. never mind the hardship of the owner of the car to get it back together. The car has now been, the windshield and everything has been restored, but I'm still mindful that even though that car has now been restored, there are still people in the hospital, there are still neighbors who witnessed this, who experienced this, who heard this, including children. And then, and I know we went out, but what more can we do? We go out again? Like, what are the really next steps typically, and what could we do ideally, given the resources, if we just had our druthers?
So that's a critical question about what more
Right.
can we do. And a part of the answer is in the community partners that are in a particular area. So if you're on Copeland and you're looking at St. John's, 12th Baptist, Roxbury Presbyterian Church, all of whom have a presence and a visibility in the community. In the case of Roxbury Presbyterian Church, you have Can We Talk, which is something that's available for long-term support and care for people on a consistent basis, going for as long as someone needs that kind of support. You have what 12th Baptist does in terms of the peace walks. 12th Baptist was there that Friday before that incident happened, sat on those very steps, right? And we'll be back again next Friday, and the Friday after that, and the Friday after that, and the Friday after, so the consistency that's there. The health centers, the design there is to be able to provide access to mental health, behavioral health services for the long term. Whenever a person decides to use it, some of the people we'll come across, we're dealing with something that happened last night, but people are still suffering from what happened 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly. And so those services, those kinds of behavioral health and mental health services are just as available for them as for things that happen in the, but that's a question I think we have to always be asking ourselves, what more can we do together?
I appreciate that. Did you want to say?
What I'll say is that you have street workers in the neighborhood as well, that for the gentlemen that been in that neighborhood where somebody got hurt, you have street workers there that will be there ready to engage some of the gentlemen that are out there and some of the families that are out there as well that won't walk into a church, that won't walk into the centers. You have street workers out there roaming the neighborhood that they can connect with. And that's important as well because there's folks in that neighborhood that's not going to go to Roxbury Presbyterian, as great as they are, in 12 Baptist Church, and will not participate in the walk. But if they see a familiar face in the street worker, they'll be able to engage them and be able to get involved in pro-social programming.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Is obviously focus on what's causing the problem down there, and I think, I talked to Jerome Smith from Neighborhood Services to look at the house where that incident happened. Last year we had a similar incident where a 5-year-old got shot, very much that originated from that house. They had obviously a house party, and it went bad, and individuals there were shooting each other, and so that's a problem properly. So I think we got to dig into what services we can bring to that house and see what's going on, so we don't have a repeat at that address. I think that's one angle. I think we've already put some cameras up on Copeland. I think either early this morning or to help focus on the street, and hopefully that will be a deterrent and let us have better eyes on the street. Obviously, we're going to increase our visibility, both hopefully have the bikes there, have more what we call code 19s, vehicles parked there, and also, obviously hope that, the community will work with us, because we can be there all we want and we can do, but the whole idea of how we stop kids from getting guns on that street and how we stop kids from wanting to act out, that's sort of beyond our control. So we can't be everywhere. We can't do everything. We need people on streets like yours to help us solve the issue, because the last thing we want to do is be overly aggressive on the street, because we're very, very tuned into, we don't want negative relationships by coming on overly strong. But I think the effort to clean up some of these hot spots, it has to be a community solution with us all working together, whether, hopefully, Friday night I'll be with Mark Scott. We'll walk Copeland Street and see what we can do to sort of make people feel better, because I know the trauma. But as far as us stepping up, we're going to try everything we can, especially on your street.
Yeah. I certainly appreciate the need for full participation and community partnership. I'd like to think there is something that we can do, and that this is very much tied to the lack of economic opportunity, the lack of dealing with trauma services and really healing.
Yep.
So even though we have the trauma response team, which I think is amazing, the work that you guys are doing, I think the question of how we can do more to really make sure that communities are healing from trauma, making sure that our schools are stronger and part of that network, and that children are not being failed by our school systems. I think those are the things that we can do, I believe.
I do too.
And I noticed, and I know I want to give time for others, but since you mentioned children, I'm noticing the peak. It's summertime, maybe young folks are out of their summer programs. When we just look at these hours here, starting from 2 to 10, we just see the peaks on, it's not numbered, so I'm not sure what page this is. Do we have additional strategies that we're looking at to deal with when they're not in a center or not at a camp or not in vacation Bible school, or like what are we doing in these hours? And the same would be true for the school year. Sure. Not just in the summer, but I'm just noticing here that we see like 2 o'clock from 10 or whatever it is here during the summer when children may not be in programming, that we just see this uptick. If anyone could speak to that, and then I will yield my time to my colleagues.
Just on the prevention side, I'll say that's why you see youth centers and teen programs and others trying to do things at night, and where they wouldn't normally do them, right? So not even programming, but hey, the Y, the Boys and Girls Club, BCOF, we're open, right? We're open. You don't normally have a Boys and Girls Club open till midnight, but you do in the summer because it's trying to keep young people in a safer space rather than in the street or in the community. So there's a lot of programming, and I would also suggest that there's also a desire to think about ensuring that we have street workers that are on at those times, as opposed to having some limited times that they may be on. And so it's trying to really make sure that we recognize the data tells us, here are the times we need to think about, and how do we ensure that we have programming and prevention-related resources around those times. That's on the prevention side that I know CBOs are well aware of that data and are really trying to fill some of those gaps.
And if I could, programs, and I give a shout out to people like Jack Connors, who step up with Camp Harborview. That program should be starting in about 2 weeks, but that takes more city kids over to the camp on the island, and that develops some skills, keeps them safe, gives these kids opportunities that they never had. So, Councilwoman, when you say that, that's what we got to do. I agree with you 100%. What these kids are lacking is opportunities, and we need to get them those to keep them out of trouble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council. We've also been joined by Councilor Anissa Sabri-George, as well as Councilor Wu. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. And Chief, I know Councilor Janey talked about trauma and how it impacts people that witness violence. But is there any city program that is on call if there's a situation that occurs late at night, that you have a rapid response trauma team that will respond to the incident and provide services almost immediately, getting people engaged in the counseling process, and at least getting people's names and numbers and following up? But is there like almost a rapid response team?
So that's the 24/7 trauma hotline that's available for trauma that's related to community violence. And one of the things that actually we got an idea from one of the activists, one of the organizers in the community, it was actually a group of them, was to create these palm cards so that people, police officers, any resident could have it available. It's got the number on it, which is 617-431-0125. And so that's what the JRI Boston Trauma Response Team staffs, and the standard is call If they don't pick up, they will often pick up. If they don't pick up, leave a message, leave a number. You don't have to leave your name. You can be anonymous so that they can call you back, and they'll call you back within 30 minutes. And they'll have a conversation about, what's going on, what kind of response do you need? Is there something where you need somebody to actually come out, or something we can do tomorrow, something we can do on the phone right now? And then if it is to be able to come out, they will come. The commissioner, some of the police captains, the street workers are frequent callers because the street workers are there. Obviously, of course, the police are there, and then they'll call. We'll have that conversation, and then the team will respond.
We usually judge it by what time of night it is and what we see for people out there when we call. I remember we had the shooting at the Tobin School where young kids were killed, and we had a ton of people out there. And I called Reverend Scott and I said, can you get down here? Because you knew there was a lot of people who had witnessed it, as opposed to 3 a.m. A lot of times there's just nobody out there. And usually I say, can you get here in the morning? Because people are going to be waking up and finding out what happened. So as far as it's usually they'll ask us, do you need us there right away? And they've been great about coming out when we need them.
Just to add a little bit, one of the things they have is the response team at the hospitals. So even if initially they don't see something happening on the scene, in the hospitals, you have street workers there that will be able to engage with families. So if they need that level of support, they can have that intake process right there.
Thank you.
Hospitals. So when that happens, and there's again, it's a network of organizations that make it happen.
Thank you. And Commissioner, I know the Boston Police has done an excellent job of, getting guns off the street for so many years. But what can we do also about there's been a lot of stabbings, but getting a lot of knives off the street? Is there a similar outreach plan on that?
Well, there's a city ordinance against, remember years ago we had a rash of stabbings, and then we started to really do checks on all these stores that were stabbing them, that were selling these. So there's already rules on the book. So if we catch someone with a blade that's over, I think it's 2.5 inches long, we'll charge them with unlawful. So there are already city ordinances on the books to address with both the stores that are selling these, as well as over the certain length, we can charge them with it.
Thank you to the panelists for taking my questions, and especially thank you for what you're doing to help so many young people across our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Saba George.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the makers, and thank you to the panel for being here. I just have one follow-up question on the trauma response teams. Are we, can you talk a little bit about, and I may have missed it in the presentation, I apologize for being late, talk about the time that they spend with families and those that have been most directly impacted by an event, both at the time of the event or just after, and what the commitment is that we expect from them over a period of time. Because as we know, especially with the summer, in the summer months, there are often multiple events, an event that follows an event pretty immediately. And what I hear sometimes from our residents is that the trauma team does respond initially, but then doesn't stick around long, and certainly doesn't stick around long enough to make any real impact on what that family or that immediate community has experienced.
Well, the idea is to help people move into recovery. And the recovery services are available for an ongoing period of time. So if it's the Boston Trauma Response Team as part of JRI, then that's going to be, they'll come, it's short-term. That's intentionally a short-term service. But then it's connected to the health centers where the long-term services are available. So, and those can go on as long as the person needs them to. And part of the reason why it's important to have a lot of different community partners is someone is going to opt to use the long-term services when somebody they trust vouches for it and sort of helps and supports them getting into those kind of services. So that could be a street worker, that could be somebody at the hospital, it could be just a friend. it could be somebody in their church, so a neighbor. And that's what will get people connected. So they'll get connected to us, we'll make the referral, but having it strengthened by somebody in the community or some other partner is what will make it actually work.
So what is the time that we're expecting that immediate response team to stay with or be with in the presence of and in direct active communication with impacted individuals?
At a scene,
Whether at the immediate scene or in that sort of initial those initial touch points where we are checking in, trying to identify the people that will need services, how long are we expecting
I
that
think
to happen?
we would stay connected and available with the person until they got to what they needed to, right? So it wouldn't be, there's no limit in that sense, right? So if a part of the team, this is as much as we can do, then we use the word warm handoff to another partner that can take it the next step. So that might, if it's the family that's surviving a homicide, then they'll have some contact, frequently the hospital, sometimes the BPD homicide unit. It could be one of our team members. And if the family chooses, it would be the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. And they'll work with them up to a certain period. And then they may, the family may say, well, we need you to come for the funeral. Then we'll do that. And then as people, what we have actually in the contracts are for the teams to check in with people at set intervals up to 18 months. That's something that came from the listening sessions. So the communities talked about that, and that is something that's expected of the teams that's in the contracts. And that goes up to 18 months.
And those listening sessions and sort of getting that community feedback, how often does that happen to make sure that we're responding to the needs? Because those needs do change over time.
So the big set of listening sessions were done in the summer of 2016. That was 14 of them. That's what really kind of crafted the design of the whole program. Then there is an expectation that at the neighborhood level, the team level, we'll go back and do more listening. To your point, right, things have changed. We know a little bit more. We've done a little bit more. But I would say we're always really trying to listen to the community, both listen to the workers that are actually out doing the work day in and day out, but then also listening to people who are impacted by it and bringing in as much of that information as we can continuously.
If I could add, Counselor, yes, we're listening for feedback, but we also, the trauma work is based in science and public health, right? So we're listening to feedback, but also making sure that it's within the realm of how do you do good trauma work? How do you meet families where they're at? How do you make sure that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, whereas a trauma team may connect, for example, this with the victims that were from this last weekend, the street workers played an integral role with them at the hospital and their families. The trauma team may have at that point stepped away because the families were connected to a street worker who they knew well, and so the engagement is there. So it's also that feedback loop, and we've had community meetings with some folks that are here, but it's also making sure we don't lose the science, because sometimes what may feel right may actually not be what the public health approach calls for. So we're trying to both balance that, and I just want to stress that, because sometimes it can be about, well, let's be clear what the trauma teams are supposed to do, and how do we make sure people understand it's baked in science.
Right, and I think that's important to make sure that we're articulating that.
Yep.
Can, I think both for the Commissioner Evans and the rest of you, what is our relationship with the Boston Public Schools, knowing that oftentimes events that happen in the summer have spilled over from situations that have often started during the school year, especially as schools wrap up this time of year. There are increased anxieties, especially for more vulnerable populations and students as they're preparing for the summer. They become afraid, and that heightens and often creates situations that we could be, I think, more proactive with a better relationship with the school department.
Well, I know Sergeant Sexton and his officers work with the kids throughout the summer. Same idea. They're following the kids. They're involved in the camps. They're involved. I know they go over to Camp Harborview and work with the kids over there. And if they see an issue developing, very much like during the school year, they do home visits with the clergy and the parents to try to get on top of it. But they're very much involved in a lot of activities, both they're in the YMCA, they're in the Boys and Girls Club. They're working with these kids throughout the summer to try to diffuse these gang issues, and they're also working with the Youth Violence Task Force on any information they may develop that there might be, heaven forbid, a shooting or something like that. But just because the school year ends, Councilwoman, they don't stop working with these kids throughout the summer. They're working with them all around the city in the various camps and basketball programs and whatever it takes.
And my last, it's more of a rhetorical, just a comment, I suppose. Making sure that both with our police resources and our outreach and our response efforts, that we are making sure that we are covering the whole city and, obviously watching those hot spots, but also knowing that we are stretching a lot of both our police officers that are on, many of them on forced overtime, a lot throughout the summer, if not year-round, but then also our response teams and our street workers. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in the city, a lot of people in crisis and experiencing trauma that we need to care for, and it really stretches our assets, our people that do this work. So it's just sort of a statement more than anything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Wu.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm mostly here to absorb and listen and learn as much as I can. Just wanted to ask one question kind of along similar lines around how to kind of wrap around everyone. As we're talking about referrals over the summer for youth in particular to the summer jobs programs and camp and this and that, many of these programs are kind of locked in. The application period happens weeks earlier, and what's the capacity like to kind of absorb more youth that you meet or come into contact with over the summer who would really benefit from those slots? And is there any way, as we're thinking about the timing of all of this, year after year, to how do we keep that flex space to pull people in when they need, but also slot people in off the wait list as we have a very long one?
Yeah, so Councilor, I think one of the things that we're trying to do is identify what those programs are that still have space and capacity. So it's a great example right now. We just in our community convenings we had around the hotspots, we learned that Sociedad Latina, for example, has openings for students, high school students that need to engage in summer school but need to engage in job training and learning. Like, they have some openings, and we learned that by convening providers that are doing work in different neighborhoods. So that's one example of multiple examples that Health and Human Services is trying to identify where are there still opportunities and how do we connect young people to those by doing that warm handoff. I also think in the city, we're trying to make sure that if there are placement opportunities through jobs and other referrals that come in, that we will work to find them, right? We can't guarantee that across the board, but we want to be flexible enough in our programs around BCYF, but also our CBOs have a lot of great, someone said this earlier, we have a lot of resources at the table, but it's how to plug people in. And it was clear the 6 meetings we had just this last week, we had maybe 25 different organizations. Probably, Roxanne was there, probably half of them have openings for teens and young adults and even older for programs. And so we captured that information and want to be able to connect young people to it. So Health and Human Services is trying to be that bridge for some of the CBOs and the city as well.
Okay. And are you finding that kind of the number of youth that you are trying to plug in kind of in this time frame and throughout the summer is about the same year to year, and therefore we could just budget for more youth summer jobs or find the funding for more jobs on the front end, or is it kind of unpredictable? What have you seen?
I mean, I think it varies from time to time, but I think what doesn't vary is that the needs get more complex, right? So just having a summer job may not be enough for a 17-year-old who's been engaged in a variety of different things, who a summer job making, little money isn't going to be enticing to them. And so the needs get more complex, which means we have to be more creative. We have to have more programs like Operation Exit and others that are going to meet the complex needs of young adults. And again, the only thing I would add is the age is also not just teenagers. We're also talking about young adults into their early 20s of trying to create resources and opportunities there as well. So the numbers vary, but the needs are getting more complex.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Wu. Conan, you better have your A game. Councilor Presley.
First, I want to thank Councilor O'Malley and Councilor Janey, the makers of this order, and thank all of you for being here and for the role that you play in community every day. I just had a question about data, and because a couple of times it has seemed that the numbers that were being reported relative to non-fatal shootings or stabbings or fatal shootings and stabbings, where family members have said, you know, I was a victim, someone in my family was a victim, and we're not counted in those numbers. So I just wanted to better understand, because the data and the numbers matter, because that gives us the leverage to advocate for the resources, to treat that trauma, to be more thoughtful about violence prevention and intervention. So where does the data come from? Is it
It's real time,
ShotSpotter? What is it?
Counselor. So every report, the BRIC's working constantly updating those.
Okay.
So year to date, we're down 17 shootings, and that's everyone who's hit with a projectile. That's what we're counting there. Some people who actually get hit by a bullet, and so that's accurate. You know, right on. Same with stabbings. They're aggravated assaults. Those are all counted. So the data is real time. It's real. It's exactly, and it's, you know, if someone was to heaven forbid get stabbed right here, we would get a page, and they would. So
Okay.
that it's kept daily, and the information you got was right up till last night. That
Okay.
we did a PowerPoint before you got here, and so the numbers are exactly what they are.
Okay, all right. Did anyone else want to add anything on the data front? Okay. And then I just, since we know that this violence is a byproduct of other social determinants and social ills, and so I very much appreciate your folks being here to speak about opportunity and how important that is, and appreciate Councilor Wu's line of questioning relative to summer jobs. And I just wanted to better understand the data around that. Since we did increase the age limit for participation, I just wonder if we're tracking who has youth jobs. You know, do we have geographic diversity? Do we have racial diversity? Do we have age diversity? I think will be very helpful if we don't already do that, so that if we see an uptick in 13-year-olds, maybe that's speaking to a greater need that we're not addressing. So.
Yeah, so yes, we do track some of that data. We don't obviously have it for this year because we're still in that process, but we are able to tell you what neighborhoods young people live in and where, who are getting jobs, what neighborhoods they live in, where their jobs are also located, so we know what neighborhoods they're going into, which I think is also a part of it. We don't need that data to tell you that 13 and 14-year-olds who don't qualify for those jobs are a gap. I mean, clearly 13 and 14-year-olds who are too old for camp, or as the commissioner said, too cool for camp, are too young to work in these programs. And so that's why we have the Super Teens program within BCYF, but that only serves, 300, 400 young people across the city? And so there is a big gap for 13 and 14-year-olds. There's no question. So that's why you have a lot of CBOs focusing on that 13, 14-year-old place, because those young people are not going to go to the camps. They're not going to do those things, but they can't work. And so it's trying to create those resources and programs. And I would say the Y, Boys and Girls Club, BCYF, a variety of other organizations are targeting that age range. So without a doubt, that is a gap right there. But on the job front, at the end of the year, at the end of the summer, we'll be able to tell you what neighborhoods, who was employed, and where the connection points were.
And there's no hierarchy of need. I mean, there's a benefit to every young person being gainfully employed for professional development, for supplemental income, for necessary income for the household, for a pathway into a job, all of those reasons. But sometimes I do wonder if a lot of our programming is serving youth who might have other access points, to get these supports, but the youth that are in the greatest need and that are the most vulnerable and at improving risk that we're maybe not reaching. I don't know if that's something that you could speak to.
Well, the one thing I'll say that we did this summer, working with Rashad Cope, we did about a month and a half ago, is bring together all the summer jobs providers, because as you know, counselors, the city hires over 3,000, 3,500, but there's 11,000 total in the Mayor Summer Jobs Program. And so we brought together the PIC, John Hancock, some of the private folks who are doing things, the hospitals, to really understand who was being served and sort of identify gaps. And part of the gaps, to be honest, is young people who may, and this speaks to this, young people who have some sort of connection to the juvenile justice system. It's difficult to get them access to certain opportunities. And so one of the things we realize is there's certain employers who will do certain things, but it's a gap for us. It's also why this year for the YE, or the Youth Employment for the City, they created the second year of their opportunity to engage those young people who are connected to the juvenile justice system with additional resources with the job, so that they're getting pipeline career pathways, sort of engaging with the fact that they have other challenges going on, and how do we keep them connected.
So we have Corey reform, but we're still struggling to get Corey-friendly employers.
Absolutely.
Despite the law change.
Right,
so
absolutely.
You don't have to say it here, but I'd be very curious to know, who are those employers who are providing a second chance so that we can lift them up and bolster them to increase their capacity.
Yep.
And then if there are folks that you have on your target list that you would need some additional reinforcement to lobby, please do add me to the list.
Yep, will do.
Commissioner?
I can tell you, the kids that we tried to target are very much like the kids you say, kids who aren't the good, and I won't say good kids, the kids who are connected. Like we work with the YMCA, they give 100 free membership week camps, and we make it clear to people like George Diaz, George, get the kids that really are in desperate need of needing the camp. So, those are the type of kids we really try to reach, especially when we have like the junior police academies. Yeah, we want the kids really who don't have anything and are just basically going to sit on their stoop for the summer and not do anything. So when we target kids, those are the kids we are targeting. The ones that might have other access, it's the kids who are in desperate need of it.
All right, and just before my time wraps, I want to ask one more question on the opportunity side of things, and then a trauma question. Are we able to track if these summer jobs are resulting in employment in the long run? So my life was changed by an internship that ultimately led to a job. And so I'm just wondering what we can do. I don't know if there's an evaluative tool where if our youth perform very well on a job, maybe they're guaranteed multi-year, summer employment, and then the opportunity, once they're in college or beyond. I really want these things to not only be workforce development, but a pathway to job and career.
Yeah, absolutely. And so briefly what I'll share with you is we added a component this year, and this has been important to me well before I got into this seat, that these job opportunities were meaningful opportunities that then create pathways. And so we embedded a couple things this year to just pilot some opportunities around financial literacy, earning college credit, relationship building, training for supervisors. So it's not just you're in an opportunity for X amount of weeks, you get a paycheck, and that's where it ends. These other support systems then create some of those pathways. So that added pilot with some of the data we've collected, there's been data collected from the PIC, NYE, and John Hancock that sort of links back to outcomes. Okay. So we have data that's sort of collected before that'll be collected again this summer. I would suggest that we need to do a better job of being clear of what we want those outcomes to be and link back sort of the programming, but that's on track of what we want to do. We just need to do it for a much larger group of young people than the smaller subsets we do it for today.
Okay. And then my last question is on trauma and how we are realigning and better coordinating efforts both to meet the need of, so this is all about preventing trauma, and then how do we treat it, and at every level. So for families who have someone who's a non-fatal victim or who have lost someone, and then back to the data point, we have this 311 where people can take a picture and say, there's a pothole, or we want a bike rack, or we want that. Are we considering any technologies or ways in which just to make sure that people know within the city what resources are available? We're so grateful for the work of Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, and they're an incredible partner with the city. But I don't know if as a city tracking, do people call your office directly and say, I know you hear from our offices.
Right.
Okay, there's a shooting, has someone gone to that home? But as we continue to bang the drum for a greater investment in those wraparound supports, in the immediate aftermath and then ongoing, I think what will bolster those efforts is if we can point to the numbers and the need.
So in terms of recovery, people who were in recovery, we did look at the services we were providing from the beginning of last year to the end of the summer, August 31st. So there were 249 people who came into for long-term care. So there's...
That they contacted you directly, or you sort of met them in community and then...
Some of it, they might have reached out to us.
Or
it
been
could have
referred,
been that,
okay.
referred to us. It could have been the team responds, they make contact with people, and then they may refer into the health centers that are providing these services. So then they'll make, it could be that the health center is doing its work, and somebody comes in presenting around recovering, looking to recover from trauma, looking for those kind of behavioral services, and then they'll enter in that way. We do the outreach that happens in the community after an event, and it also kind of goes on continuously, and people will enter in that way. So there are a number of ways that when people are particularly ready for recovery services,
yes,
where they're able to access at some point that works for them. It could be calling the hotline.
Well,
it could be
now
walking
close here. The
into
reason why, and I thank the chair for his indulgence and the makers of this order for this extra time, but, and I was speaking sort of half joking, referencing 311, but I do think, the protocols in the system doesn't work if people's access to services is based on who they know to call. Okay, because there needs to be more of a general understanding. And so I just wonder if there is a budget relative to marketing and outreach. Could we have things in bus shelters, that just says if you know someone who is experiencing trauma, because this is the number to call, this is the office to call. I just continue to feel that people just don't know, other than the Peace Institute, that where the city of Boston is concerned, that they know who to call.
Well, Counselor, coming to a bus stop near you are just those signs.
Okay.
We're also going to have posters that we'll take out and put in businesses.
Okay.
So in the bodegas and in the restaurants, there'll be signs.
And so what's the office will be saying, this is your point of contact, this is who to call?
This is who to call.
The only other thing I'll add is that we are in the process with public safety, neighborhood services, and HHS exploring the ability to have you call 311 to access trauma services.
Okay, that was
so
we're
working on that as we speak. We're trying to work through a couple details, and there's folks in the audience doing more work on it than me, but we are trying to do that so it's simple, right? There's a number here, and I have a card, but I have to look at the card to know the number. 311 you're going to remember, and so we're trying to figure out if there's a way to do that similarly the way we do it right now around substance use recovery. You can call 311 and get a warm handoff. We're trying to figure that out as well, but regardless, I think Mark spoke to this. We know we need to raise the visibility of the work that the trauma teams are doing so that every person knows how to access it and knows what it is, and that's what him and his team are trying to do.
And we also have cards that we give out at the scene to a lot of people that Reverend Scott and the trauma team has given to us. So when we're on the scene, we are giving people pamphlets and cards. We have a bunch, so we're also reaching out to people who might be impacted, who, by the time they get there, might have left the scene.
Okay, and then the thing I would say about that campaign, obviously just making sure that it's multilingual, because we make, there are communities disproportionately impacted by violence, but it is moving, it is growing, so we want to make sure that access to those services is being translated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Presley. That'll do it for the first panel. I just, on behalf of the City Council, thanks for all the data, the information, the stick-to-itiveness that you all have for this summer. And, whatever God you pray to, let's hope for a safe summer and continued safety for everybody. So we'll let the first panel go. Again, thank you very much. The second panel is Reverend Willie Broderick, Aisha Barnes, Carlene Luma, Wendy Polanco, and Samantha Montano.
I will take, just because everyone's been so patient, I think the chair stepped out, so I will happily welcome this panel. And Rev, if you just want to begin introducing yourself, we'll just go down. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. My name is Reverend Willie Bodrick II. I am a Roxbury resident, proud Roxbury resident, as well as serving as the associate pastor at the historic 12th Baptist Church. This past weekend, oh, you want to go ahead?
You wanted to
Shall we?
Yeah, why don't you just present? Yeah, everyone can introduce themselves and offer an opening statement. And I just ask you, if you're going to have a conversation, if you could just take it out in the hallway, please. Thank you, folks. Thanks, Rev.
This past weekend was a tumultuous time for our community. We particularly saw events where almost seven people were shot in the city, and 4 of those were right down the street from where I live and very close to my counselor, Counselor Janey. And I'm here today as a community partner, as a minister, as a lay person, but also as a concerned resident, to contribute to a transparent and comprehensive solution to violence in our community to ensure safety for all of our citizens. Serving as associate pastor at 12th Baptist Church has been a great blessing, and weekly we are walking throughout our community, as you've heard, and as many of you have joined and shared with us, along with community persons, with Boston Police Department, with electeds, and so many others in our neighborhood, trying to share the love and peace that we believe comes from God. And we're also particularly trying to work to build relationships, not only between us and the church and our community, but also between law enforcement and our community comprehensively. And we know that we must continue this work, and we know that this work is important and is having a great impact. But what must be stated is that it's only a piece of the puzzle, and we recognize that it is not the end-all, be-all. And we are here because I really want us to think comprehensively about each institution and each part of our city, thinking critically not only about the root causes, but also the results of violence. We all know that one shooting is one too many in this city. And we know that usually this conversation journeys down the slippery slope of blame. But we are here today to think critically about what we can do. And in this conversation, I want to ensure that we're having a conversation around solutions as well. Stemming the tide of violence has been stated as a socioeconomic issue. And we recognize that there are young people in this city who are working. We know the work that's being done and the jobs that are being provided. But there's so many other young people that live in my neighborhood, that go to my church and that are in other churches and community organizations and in schools writ large that are not working and that are not having the access points to getting opportunities. And we are here to actually advocate so that those young people voices do not go silent. We believe that there needs to be substantive job training and skills that not only prepare them for a profession or for a vocation, but we want to make sure that these young people are being service comprehensive, that there are wraparound services for them. I suggest that recognizing that there's a gap, that the city council consider in the budget of next year, putting away some funds or considering a line item to go directly to that gap age, the gap funding for our young people in the ages of 13 to 14 years old, and ensuring that there is funding that could be matched by private partnerships in order for our young people to have jobs, as well as connecting them to those resources that the city has available. The next thing I want to make sure is clear that it's 3 o'clock, and this began at 1 o'clock. I heard very clearly that there's a call for community, but I have to let you know, Council, that this is not the time to connect to community. I thank you all, and I thank the commissioner and all those who work for the city, but most of the people that need to be here, that should be here, that are being affected by the violence are at school or at work. And so one of the things I'm asking is that throughout the summer and even throughout the year, that there are continual hearings to address this particular issue of violence, and that this is not an inaccessible civic engagement. We want to make sure that people have voice, that people have a chance to contribute, that the people who need to know who the particular actors are in city government are here to see their faces and not just see names on cards. And so I'm imploring you that not only do we do these meetings, but that we open up these meetings into our communities, that we have more hearings in our neighborhoods so that people have access to this conversation, and the people that are affected the most are there and are giving and are engaged. I also say that we don't have particular focus on our young people. There are youth that need to be heard, and usually it is adults that are having conversations about them, but I think we should have a youth, particularly a youth-only hearing, just for young people to talk. No adults, nobody else, just to hear the voices of young people. And I ask that we do that, and we think about doing that before this summer ends. One of the other things I want to make sure that is mentioned before my comments come to a close is that we are not reactive to violence. I usually feel like in this city, a lot of the times we come together in a haste because things start to happen. But that can't be our strategy, and I have to say, even to our commissioner who walks with us weekly, that we have to open up the access for the strategy plan to be engaged with the community. And so one of the solutions I suggest is that this council think about promoting or proposing a community violence task force that works year-round. Some of the questions that have been asked by our councilors could have been answered by a community task force that has been working on this issue, not when it's May and it's about to get hot, but in January, but in October, in the fall, in the winter, before things get here. We know the numbers. We can trace this back 10 years, but we can do a better job as a city to bring about comprehensive partners. I would love to see Boston Public Schools here at this hearing. This is an issue that connects throughout every aspect of our lives, and I'm asking from each and every one of you who have committed to this work to help us bring about a community task force for violence that involves our healthcare professionals, that involves advocates, that involves youth, that involves our clergy, our lay persons, that involves our police, that destabilizes this very parochial approach towards doing the strategy. I walked in this evening and this afternoon, and I saw downstairs the development plans for the Housing Innovation Lab. And what I know about the development plans is that there's open access for the public to comment, but also to give their suggestions to those developers. The same can happen with the issues of violence in the city, that we need to open and create an accessible opportunity for the public to engage. That means we need to shift times. That means we need to be very transparent with what we're doing, and we need to make sure that each and every person that is here at the table. I'll concede at this time my time, but I thank you all for allowing me to speak, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions moving forward.
Thank you very much. That was well said. Yes.
How are you?
Wonderful.
I'm Aisha Barnes, and I'm currently the case manager and oversee the Strive Forward program in Common Square area. As myself, a young person who grew up in the Franklin Fairhope housing development, I was, like so many of us, have been in a situation where I was a person who witnessed violence at a very young age. 13 years old, I saw my best friend shot and killed in front of my face. So, of course, being in this work, being able to give back to my community, this is an absolute honor to be able to work with the young people in the community. What we do at Strive is try to provide all the things that we talked about earlier: certifications, job paths, education, supportive services, re-engagement into school, alternative school plans, because most of our young people that come to us may have dropped out and may have been in a situation and don't kind of know, or the parents don't have the guidance to make sure that the young people are going back to school, or maybe the school is not right for them. So that is a huge issue. But getting the young people certifications in Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and connecting them to actual employers that will hire them because of those certifications, making sure they're having the very simplistic certifications like CPR, first aid, and AED, so they can gain not only summer employment, but year-round employment. I think the biggest struggle that we have and see at Strive is parents. We have our young people, we get our referrals from Boston Public Schools, we get it from the court system, but when we having those young people that are 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, the parents are not as engaged as they should be. So getting them to fill out documentation can be difficult. Getting to gain the documentation from the parents can be very, very difficult. So that's the biggest struggle that we see. I think a lot of our parents are uneducated. They're not aware of what's available to them, and they don't trust the adults that are providing services to our young people. I think we're on the right path by providing jobs and certifications and giving education support, but there's so much that needs to happen in our city for our young people, because we have young people that are trying to, be successful in life. But it's a struggle because you have to go back home to those significant problems. That was a huge struggle for me. You have to go back home to that Franklin Field housing development where things are is in turmoil. I think a key point is making sure that we're taking our young people out of the city, because that's something that saved my life. Knowing that there was a world outside of Boston that you needed to be able to get to, and in order to do that, you need to go to school. You needed to be, better in your life and do better things and make better decisions. I don't offer any solution, but to just try to continue to work with the young people. Any young person that walks through my door, they're not only a member for whatever time the length of the programming is, they're a lifetime member to me. I make sure that my phone is available to them. I make sure that it doesn't stop at 5 o'clock when the office closes. Sometimes you gotta be out there at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night to be available to the young people, because that's when the struggle happens. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
Aisha, thank you for your work. Charlene?
Hi.
How are you?
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlene Luma, and I'm the Program Director of the Boston Trauma Response Program at Justice Resource Institute, also known as JRI. So I know you heard a little bit about some of the work that the trauma teams are doing. I'm going to talk specifically about the work that we're doing at the Boston Trauma Response Program. So the Boston Trauma Response Program provides rapid response to homicide affecting young people 13 to 24 years old. We provide short-term case management, coping groups, psychological first aid, as well as ongoing therapy. The team consists of licensed, trained clinical master's level clinicians, as well as volunteers. And we are available 24/7, as you heard earlier, and the staff has the capacity to respond to emergencies within 30 minutes. I wanted to thank the council for highlighting the need for trauma response services and committing to ensure that individuals in the city of Boston have the resources they need to receive the services. Following a traumatic event, youth and families often feel helpless, confused, and in emotional shock. They're confronted with a situation they're often not prepared for and unsure what the next steps are. So our teams are really there to help support with the follow-up next steps, particularly when you're dealing with what I would call probably the most horrific thing anyone has to experience, to lose a loved one to homicide. We provide the necessary immediate services that are available to support to families in crisis until they're ready to manage these things on their own. So until they're able to access their natural resources and supports. We currently receive funding from the City of Boston and the Massachusetts Office of Victim Assistance. We were established in 2015 and have since served over 1,500 individuals, as well as providing over 100 responses. Responses include funerals, coping groups, vigils, home visits, as well as just individual one-on-one sessions. Individuals who've worked with us have received case management services, psychological first aid, stabilization, advocacy, and referrals to other community resources. I had the opportunity to speak before the council in October 2015. And at that time, we requested that the council consider the need for a collaborative coordinated response to services in the city of Boston. Since that time, we've partnered with the Boston Public Health Commission in an effort to address that specific need. Our program currently works with the commission in the neighborhood trauma teams to provide a continuum of services. And within the continuum, we have, again, case management services, on-scene crisis response. And additionally, we're adding a cohort of about 20 people that will be available to respond to on-scene crisis response to homicide. And in addition to just making sure that we have these individuals available. One of the things that each person who's part of this cohort is going to receive is training that includes psychological first aid, as well as understanding what trauma really is, as well as how do you take care of yourself, right? We want to make sure that the people doing this work are able to do it for some time. So we think about longevity, we think about sustainability, and that includes supervision as well as techniques and coping skills for yourself. So the partnership that we have with the commission has allowed the trauma team to enhance our services and really allowing us to respond to a broader group of folks. So when we think about the people we want to target, it's not just homicide survivors, it's people who are victims of non-fatal shootings and injuries. Because what we do know is that those victims will become those homicide victims. So once you're a victim of an injury sustained by either shooting, a gunshot wound, or stabbing, you're more than likely to be re-injured in the community again. So we want to make sure that we are accessing those individuals. So the cohort, as well as the neighboring, the partner organizations, really assist in us outreaching to those individuals so that they can get the services. So currently, we've partnered with many organizations, but I just wanted to take the time to highlight our partners that are really vital to the work. We work collaboratively with the street workers. They're a vital part in us doing the work. They really kind of have the street knowledge that we need to identify the victims and survivors who need the services. We work closely with the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, as well as the PIM Project, the Boston Police Department, and the DA's offices, who provide ongoing services through their victim witness programs. So as we continue to move forward and provide trauma services, I would like to encourage the council to support the following recommendations. A streamlined notification system for incidents related to homicides, particularly those that and non-fatal injuries, particularly those who result in non-fatal injuries. There has been some difficulty accessing those individuals. When there's a homicide survivor, we can identify them either through our partner agencies or the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, but we want to make sure that we have a method in order to identify those who are victims of non-fatal injuries. And ongoing support for trauma response service providers. So again, we want to make sure that people have the resources and tools that they need in order to do this work long term. It's not easy work, and we want to make sure that people have the resources they actually deserve. And finally, thank you for your consideration, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much. Wendy?
My name is Wendy Polanco, and I'm the president of the task force at Mildred C. Haley.
Yep.
There you go. Now? Perfect. Okay. We do have a safety committee in our residency, but I feel sometimes that we go in and we talk and we cry to the police and to everybody. Yes, we have made progress with the police, and we have a lot of policing around it. They just don't come out of the car and chat with the residents. They would like to see that they're having more interact with the police instead of, oh, he's standing there, something happened, there's a shooting, there's a stabbing, what happened, why he's standing there? There's a lot of shootings, especially at the beginning of May. There was 2 dead people, but also it could have been a 4-year-old shot as well that nobody mentioned. But we're dealing with that family, and it's heartbreaking because if we don't feel safe, we gotta pay rent. We gotta go to work, we gotta send the kids to school, and then come home running to lock ourselves in our house. I don't think nobody should live like that. I've been working with Will from BCYF. He wants to come in because I know that we shouldn't be putting a lot of people into jail. And I know some of those people are just around because my father did it, my my son is going to do it, and my nephew is going to do it, and everybody's going to do it. No, it got to end. For that, we need resources. For that, we need job training for kids. Not only at 13, because we seen 10 and 9-year-old with guns, robbing around where we live, phones, just to get into the gang. We got to come up with a plan to stop that. So, but I've been working with E13, and we're trying to communicate, but I feel like they got to put a little bit more effort to communicate with everybody, not to sit in their car and just look at things. And sometimes I have to call 3 times a week the police, just when there's a car sitting right next to where the elderly lives. They cannot move, they cannot pass because all the gang members are sitting there drinking and smoking, and they're afraid to come out. Those are elderly people that shouldn't be living like that. So to me, it's like we need funding. We need to bring those kids. We need to give them opportunity. We have sent kids to DC that are related to gang involved, so they could see something outside of where they live, because we don't want to lock them up in Mildred Haley. We want them to see the world as safe. They went to New York as well to a program with the police. I know the commissioner said they have, but a lot of people don't feel safe sending their kids to camp with the police because of everything that is happening right now with the police. So I'm like, we're trying to do a youth center so kids could come. The mayor said that he will support that. Hopefully he come through and support that. But meanwhile, people are getting afraid because summer is coming. Last summer, we have almost 2 kids that got shot. Thank God they didn't die. But what can we do? Where are we gonna, who else gotta die before we do something? So we do have a youth group that Sam will talk more about it. We did invite some of them, but because they're in school, they couldn't make it today.
Thank you, Wendy. Samantha?
Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Montano. I work at the Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation, and through there I work with Wendy at the Mildred C. Haley Apartments that was Bromley Heath before. So for 5 years, we received funding from Boston Children's Hospital to do a youth leadership program. This is its last year. I'm pretty sure we're going to get more funding again, but we're currently in the 5th year. And since I've been doing that program with the youth, which is the past 3 years, the projects that the youth have wanted to address have consisted of violence, gang issues, and community safety. So one of the projects they did was that Unity mural that's on Bromley Heath on Center. They organized that. This year, they're going to be doing a kind of like a youth pop-up night in the ABCD office, which was formerly the Cave, a youth center in Bromley Heath. And they're inviting a bunch of youth in the neighborhood to come out. The idea is to have a space that's open past 6 o'clock till like 9 or 10 o'clock so that youth have something to do in the evening. Some things that have come to light working with youth in the Bromley Heath, Mildred C. Haley neighborhood is that a lot of the youth this past year especially have been closely connected and closely impacted by the shootings and deaths in Bromley Heath. So access to these jobs and these summer opportunities for youth who don't want to leave their house and who are afraid to be in crowds is really difficult. So if we could have more trauma-informed youth programming for youth who feel overwhelmed in crowds, who feel like they can't go into big groups. BCYF has a great program, but there are a ton of kids who go to those summer programs, or the camps consist of large groups of children. And right now I know a handful of youth who just don't feel comfortable being in large crowds. Similar to what Wendy said, as far as community service officers, in Jamaica Plain with E13, we have 5 great community service officers, but those officers aren't the ones who show up when incidents happen. It's other officers who haven't interacted with the community and might not be as sensitive and as tuned into the needs of the community. So if we can get more funding for more community service officers, that would be great, and more training for police officers who are going to be working in that part of the neighborhood and understand the issues and the needs and how to react and how to be more trauma informed when responding to things that happen on the weekends or things that happen late at night. Like Wendy said, we need, and everyone else has said, I didn't realize that there were BCYF centers that were open till 11 or midnight, or boys and girls centers. In Jamaica Plain, I don't think we have anything open that late. So having something open that late would be great. And then I know that I've gone out with youth when they get donations for Boston Red Sox tickets, and their parents only let them come if I agree to walk them home. So then I'm walking kids home late at night too, and that's a necessity. We need people who are willing to safely walk youth home to their houses and wait till they get in. And then even when they get in, it's not assured that they'll make it through the hallway safely, you know? So addressing safety outside the building, but also inside the building in Bromley Heath. As far as the trauma process, I think it can be a little unwieldy. We've had Bromley Heath neighbor partners meetings where several different people are offering trauma resources, but they're not all together and they don't make sense and they're not in a streamlined process. And so we don't know who does this work reliably and who can be connected with the community well and who does it through the city, who does it through the neighborhood, and how those two things are combined. So is it safe to send someone to one place where maybe they feel more comfortable because that person looks like them, but are they doing the work well? And are they going to be able to connect those people to better, higher resources if the need arises? And then is the city going to provide that representative work and representative therapists to help people in the community as well? So getting that process a little bit streamlined. And then I think to end, I'd like to say that I think we sometimes separate our youth so that there's youth who are like at risk in one corner and youth who are considered not at risk in another corner, and we don't allow them to integrate. And we don't provide like a holistic environment for youth to come together. So I'd like to see more of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your incredible work. Some of you I've known for years, others I'm getting to know, but I'm really impressed with all of your level of commitment and your incredible work ethic to serve our community. It's remarkable, and I'm really grateful that you could share with us. The purpose sometimes of these hearings, as many of you know, is to get ideas, to generate things. There's no bill before us, there's no ordinance. We wanted to solicit feedback, and we're going to hear some more from the public next. But one thing I'd like to do, and I'll pose it to all of you, anyone can jump in that feels free, is to think of one concrete idea that we can do going forward. And Sam just had one that I'm going to steal from you already, because I think that's absolutely right. We do often segregate our kids at risk, not at risk, and that's not a healthy model or a particularly successful model. So as we talk about sort of allocating funds for BCYF programming, making sure we have resources for community centers to stay open later, the transportation piece that I think Will Morales, perhaps Reverend Scott talked about earlier, is another crucial one as well, to make sure that we can get a kid home safely after he or she stays out. So is there anyone that can think of just, it's not sort of generalized, we need more resources, we need more money, we know that, but any specific thoughts that you all would like to see happen or sort of implemented as we gear up for the summer that maybe we can put into action?
Yeah, I think, excuse me, Reverend Willie Bodrick again, as I mentioned earlier, I think hearing the children is an important thing. I think that's actionable right now. I think literally if you call the schools and said, look, we're going to have a meeting next week, A, B, C, and D, we're going to provide some food opportunities to listen to you all, that can happen. I also think that there seems like there's some institutional disjointing, and it's only happening in these meetings, but they're not happening in the spaces where the children are. And so literally just going to the high school and having sessions about what resources are available to our young people could go a long way. I know that sometimes we're having a lack of parental involvement, but sometimes just directly going to the children and saying, you know what, Miss So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, can we take 30 minutes or 20 minutes of your time, or take 20 minutes of this day to talk about the resources that we have available, give packets. I know we can do some things to really get right in front of our young people's faces and really talk to this. Also, I think we could be thinking about some conflict resolution practices that can be implemented in our school systems as well as in our communities. We have a lot of people doing great work, but I don't think we've been as proactive as we need to be to think about restorative justice practices, to think about recidivism, to think about conflict resolution. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we do know that resources and finances won't fix it all. And we have to equip people with what they need to actually engage and do that work. And so I think those are two very actionable things. And then just, I think Councilor Presley touched on it earlier, we need to know where our children are. I think there are too many children that are lost in the numbers, and they fall through the cracks, and we're not traveling and tracking them to where they are. And we can actually identify who some of these young people are, where they are, what they're doing. And if we know where they're either veering or they're on a particular track, let's try to disrupt that right where it is. And so I think a lot of times we're letting people fall through those cracks. We need to do a better job tracking our young people. And I think some institutional collaboration to making sure that our teachers, our police officers, our counselors, whoever it is working with our young people, are talking to one another. Because it's one thing to talk in a meeting and we all take a lot of notes, but those notepads are in the office, on the shelves, we're giving to staff. It's another thing to really directly connect those people, and I think that'll be great. Thank you.
And the other, I agree with you 100% on all of those issues. And the other thing is sometimes we talk to ourselves. So to sort of get out, I think you used the term institutional disjointing. You're right. You're 100% right. We all agree on these things. We can have good ideas, but to get to the right audience, it's going to be the most impactful. Those are great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on any thoughts? Or please.
I know that we spent a lot of time speaking specifically about the youth, but I think that we need to be looking at a larger age range. And don't quote me on this, but I believe the average homicide victim age was 26, right? So that's outside of that 24-year-old that we're focusing on. So thinking about summer programs, what about kind of programs for older adults or kind of those adults who are kind of in between, who need programming and who our young people look up to and who are getting involved in the violence and who are perpetuating the violence. So I think that when we look at a plan, it should be comprehensive. So let's think about the little young ones, but also thinking about the other folks that are coming out of the system and who need jobs and who need a place to live and who are kind of being impacted by the opioid epidemic. So thinking about all those things, because we have to think about how this impacts the community as a whole and not on just one demographic. So I know it's a lot, but I think that's something that should be at least part of the conversation.
That's helpful. That's great. You're in a very good point as well. We don't want to direct too many resources, or a lack of resources because of, an age range that we may not be as focused on as we should be. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you. That's all I have for this round.
All right.
Thank you, Mr.
Great.
Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Councilor Janey?
Thank you so much. I'm just incredibly blessed. I've got Reverend Willie Broderick here, lives in my neighborhood, a partner in this work, happy to join on the peace walks with you. And I really appreciate the push. I know we've had conversations about, what this could look like. And I agree, our young people need to be at the table. So I really appreciate you continuing to push on that and really trying to figure out how we continue these conversations so that it isn't just a one-off. I also agree that our young people are very segregated. I think you made that comment. And, that happens in our neighborhoods, that happens in our schools. Even though the majority of children who live in the city of Boston go to Boston Public Schools, they are very much not only segregated from in their home communities, the neighborhoods that they're coming from, but when they get into our schools. And then we start sorting them out some more through different programs in BPS. Some we say need to be over on this side, receiving these types of supports and services, and others have greater opportunity. And so we certainly need to do much more to make sure that there's more integration and that all of our young people have opportunity. So I thank you for all of that. I'm really kind of moved by this panel in particular. I think the last panel was great, and we knew we would hear from police and folks, but to have, residents here, I think that is definitely what we wanted to make sure that we were incorporating in this hearing and making sure that we were getting to solutions. And so I think moving forward, it would be important, Mr. Chair, to think about how we continue the dialogue moving forward, that we're bringing all of the right people to the table, making sure that they have space that is safe for them to share. And, and that's some of the trade-off of doing a hearing here in this building, which, I'm a community organizer. I like to do things out in the community. And then it becomes, well, which neighborhood? And then if we do it over here, is someone going to have beef with the people, so that was one trade-off we had to consider. I think the other thing is really making sure that there was ownership by this entire body. And I know my colleagues care about this issue, which is why you've seen folks throughout the afternoon at this hearing. I'd like to think more about the solutions. I'm interested kind of in this youth forum. I know there have been several youth forums, youth marches already where youth have really been the leaders of those spaces, as they should. So I'm just curious for clarification. Were you suggesting that the council as a body hold space for our young people, or that we attend something that youth are organizing?
I think the council as a body should hold something for our young people. I think there has to be an equivocation of power. And if we really want to hear our young people actually come forward, I think some of the better ideas might come from them, particularly knowing that they experience that which even myself being at 30 is distant from. And so I think one of the things that we should do, I think there was some social media stuff that's talked about and other things. I mean, there's a whole nother world in which they're operating in. And I'm not sure that us adults are as well equipped to deal with and address the ways in which information travels, as well as how they come to understand the world in which they live in. And so I think the council should hold a space, particularly whether you want to call it a hearing, meeting. I think the name matters not to me, but literally the seriousness to engaging them is what I care about the most, and making sure that their voices are lifted and are taken seriously in your considerations as you move forward to make decisions.
I appreciate that. And coming back to, I think it was you, Charlene, that mentioned the age of not just the victims but the perpetrators, and I know that is that's true. I think there's a lot of focus on young people because we want to interrupt and do some prevention, but I think you bring up an important point around how we really are engaging those folks who most likely we've failed as a society to do a better job to make sure that they had opportunity when they were young, which is why we see what we see now. So I think thinking about how we can kind of loop folks in, I don't know if it's through the Street Workers Program. I know we heard some great testimony earlier, and I saw firsthand the difference of how some of the street workers were able to kind of engage with neighbors very differently than how maybe clergy or others were able to engage with neighbors when experiencing violence in their community. So I don't know if there's more of a pipeline to either become a street worker or to kind of get connected in some other way to a path forward. I think there's more to be done to making sure that there are employers that are much more Corey-friendly and who are doing more around second chances, to your point, Councilor Presley, earlier. So thank you. I want to make sure we go around and then I can have some follow-up.
Thanks.
Oh, please.
Can I share a
And then
resource?
Charlene, yes.
Oh, sorry. Would you like to go?
No, you can go ahead, sir.
Yeah.
The Boston Public Health Commission is holding hearings for youth on violence this summer. And I know that they partnered with BHA, so that's how I'm aware about it. But I don't know if that's something to drop into if you're interested as well. That's already happening. Sorry.
Excellent.
And is it okay if I share another opportunity at Strive? So not only do we service young people, we also have a 18 to infinity, I like to say it when people call, of those reintegration services that we are talking about. So there's no range on who can come in the building. If you've been out of work, sometimes we have people that are just, coming from reintegration. They need to get back to work. We have people that's been on DTA for quite some time, but we provide education support services. We have aligned partners that we have. It's a 5-week program that runs Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. The idea of the program is to get adults in the good habit of getting ready for work. So it's 4 weeks in class training. They get Microsoft Word, simplistic training, basic computer skills. They really focus on professional development as well as dress. And we take them out to get clothing. We have a clothing closet that's in our building to make sure. But then we have the 5th week of our program is when we bring our Corey-friendly partners to the graduates. So literally, the partners, Brigham and Women's is one of our partners, just a newly one where they are open to taking clients with the Corey. We have Integral Resources. We have a bunch of different partners that because they're a Strive graduate, they are able to come. So we do have, those services are out there, and there's no criteria whatsoever. You just need to be 18 plus with an ID and a social.
How large are those classes?
They can range from anywhere from 20 to about 30 or 40 in a room.
20 to 30? And
Yes.
what's the retention during the 5-week program? Do you lose folks? I assume you lose a few people.
Yes, probably about 10 people that we might lose. And then the key to that is they can always come to the next cycle.
And do they come back to the next cycle?
Yes,
People
they
that you
do.
lost?
Yes, they
Excellent.
do.
And those who stick with it, how many are then placed?
So right now we have a class that just started right at the end of May, and there was a total of 25 in the classroom, and right now in week 3 before graduation, 15 of the 25 are already working.
Oh, excellent. Are you able to follow up with them longer term to see if they're still employed at that same employer?
Absolutely.
Like 6 months down the road, a year down the road?
Right, absolutely. So what we tell them is once you're a Strive member, you're always a lifetime member. So we get phone calls. We do quarterly check-ins. We have the relationship with the employer, so we can check in through the employer, because sometimes they get so busy, and that's good, they're working. So, but we do follow up and give them a call and keep in touch. And then if we have anything new that's coming through the door, we invite graduates to come in, even to speak to a new class at orientation time, to just let them know that this is possible. Even with a background, you can actually continue and get yourself back together and get back to work. So I just wanted to let people know that was available.
Thank you.
Councilor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Council McCarthy, and I enjoyed your comments from both of you. Before my job as a counselor, I was a probation officer at Suffolk Superior and had the opportunity to visit Strive several times. Many of my probationers attended there and graduated there, and it's an excellent program. They do great work, and you really see the difference of a probationer that starts at Strive and then finishes at Strive. It builds self-confidence and really develops their skills. And so you guys do a great job. You were talking about the age of a homicide victim is, 25 or 26, the average age. Those are really the people we need to reach, and we may not be able to reach them through formal schooling, but we certainly can reach them through, job training programs and, getting them on a path to getting a job, getting a career, getting skills. This city is booming right now, and there should be certainly a place in Boston for someone that comes out of Strive so that they can get a good, decent job in Boston. So that's what I hope to focus on, and hopefully I can work with you all. But I just want to say thank you for what you're doing, helping so many people across our city.
Thanks, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Anissa Sabi-George.
Thank you again. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Just a couple of questions on some of the things that were shared. Aisha, you talked about the CPR certification. I am hoping to get that done and make it a graduation requirement within the Boston Public Schools. So 3 cheers for that, and I'd love your help and thoughts on making that a reality. I do want to hear a little bit about what psychological first aid is. what does that look like in practice? Oh, I'm sorry, that was you, sorry.
Yeah, so psychological first aid is a stabilization tool that we utilize. And one of the interesting things about it is that anyone can do it, right, as long as you're trained. So this doesn't require a specific degree of skill set. It's very intuitive. It's kind of making sure that people kind of have access to resources like such as natural supports, that they have a plan for self-care, and that they're utilizing some coping skills in the moment to manage some physical symptoms that you may have that in response to a traumatic event or incident. So I always like to tell people when I'm training them, like, if you saw there was an accident that took place in front of you, what's one of the first things you would do? You'd probably walk over and see if the person needed help. And that's how it starts, right? You ask if they need help, you ask if there's anything that they need, and then get them access to those resources. So we like to make sure that people who are on the trauma teams have that skill set, so they've all been trained in psychological first aid. Thousands of people across the city of Boston have also been trained through the Boston Public Health Commission, and all of you guys can be trained as well. Again, it's really allows us to really stabilize people when they're kind of feeling like they're having a difficult time.
Do you, has there been any specific training within any of our community centers, community-based organizations, in our schools with teachers or older youth?
And I know in the past that there has been. I don't know what the recent numbers look like. That's more of a question for the commission. I know that they've done a lot of good work around that previously. But currently, our partners through the neighborhood trauma teams, so the CBOs, the health centers, all of those members have been trained. And on Monday, we're looking to train 20 community members who have signed up for this on-call cohort.
That's great, thank you. And thank you for sharing that. Even I think the introduction to anyone who might be watching from home, just sharing that little bit of information could be helpful. And then you also talked about the streamlining of notification for non-fatal injuries or incidences. Is there a city that does this?
Not that I'm aware of. I think it's something that we definitely have to figure out. I think that's a gap that we're managing. We do a really good job at supporting survivors of homicide. They're generally easier to identify, right? For non-fatals, they're not so easy to identify for a number of reasons. So I'm just wondering, what would that look like if we had a better streamlined notification process, so that if there is somebody who is a victim of a shooting or stabbing and does go to the hospitals do kind of provide those services, but what if they don't want to receive the services from the hospital? We want to make sure that we have access to those individuals in the community so we can meet them where they're at, so they don't have to walk into a clinic, but we can go to them if that's what they want, like do home visits, and making sure that they know that they have just as much access to the services as a survivor of homicide.
I'd be curious to know, and do a little research. You know, we talk a lot about the benefits of the community policing model that we use here in the city, but recognize that there are a lot of gaps, and maybe some of this is happening somewhere else,
right,
that we could duplicate or replicate in a way that works
right.
in the city.
And if we look at the numbers, we know that there are way more victims of non-fatal injuries than there are of homicide.
And then, go ahead.
So just wondering kind of where are these victims, and how do we get them the services that they should have access to if they want them?
Right. And because we often hear of too many stories where there is eventually a fatal incident that involves someone who's been involved in non-fatal incidences prior. And then the conversation around the community task force. I think that's, doing anything 12 months so that it's both, it can act reactively the way that we are, I think, today in so many ways, but it can be a very proactive organization, like you said. How do you keep some of the politics from out of that? Because in this city, that's what happens. When you put a group together, you always pick all the wrong people.
Well, I hope we don't always
No,
pick all
but-
the wrong people.
well, there's
know what
always
you
a
mean.
sampling of the,
I
you know.
think one of the things that we have to just be conscious of is that we're not meeting the same people all the time.
Right.
And so I think some of that is saying, you know what, maybe if we create a task force that is limit-based, time limit, there's a temporal timeline, maybe 2-year service, and then you can't come back onto this council until somebody else new is refreshed. I mean, I think there are different ways to go about it. I think you can't avoid the politics of it, but I do think having an open and honest and transparent process would be the best part of creating that type of network. And I think there are certain people who, or certain institutions are a part of the city structure that should be there no matter what. And so I think some of that is just what representative will be there from, city council or from, Boston Public Health Commission or from one of the youth service groups. But also just thinking about how do we get more and more names called, because I'm a great advocate. I work with many of these organizations in my work at the Attorney General's office. But I do know that if we continue to think critically about how do we get more and more people involved, and even thinking about committees within that, you're going to be able to, I think, just lift the load a little bit lighter. But I think some of that we're going to have to just deal with the politics. But others, I think there's some ways to mitigate the end by just not having repeat players at the table where it seems like only certain people are brokering the access to power. So.
I think, limiting the time that you can spend, and that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I also would say that most of the people that are offended for not being a part of it, it's really a symptom of everybody does want a piece of this action and helping in this situation.
I think we all want to fix the problem, and I think that we just have to make sure that we focus the work on the problem and not the persons. And so sometimes I think sometimes that there's a defensive reaction to a lot of community, and people feel that. And so I think if there's one thing I would suggest from even the city, to think critically about the responses to a lot of people who don't always feel that they have the voice or don't always feel they have access to power, and really just take that second step back to think critically that sometimes the angst and the anger is coming from a real place and not really a personal attack. You just happen to be in the office to do the work. So we thank you all. We really do thank you all. But I think we have to just think comprehensively. I'm willing to help. I'm always willing. I will be there to help. And if the community senses that certain people should be on that task force, I think we should consider that and loop in as many people as possible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank this panel very much for spending so much time with us and all the work that you do outside. And Reverend, honestly, we'll take it up. We've had hearings, public safety hearings before out in the community. We've had community meetings out in the community where they belong. And we'll certainly we'll talk to the makers of this order, Councilor Janey and Councilor O'Malley, and we'll get on that together. So thank you all very much. We're going to go to public testimony now. As far as the sheets, public testimony, we have 6 people who signed up for public testimony. If you did not check the yes box and you are now thinking that you do want to say something, if you can just line up behind the people who I'm about to announce, and then we'll go. I'll start the timer. We'll have about 2 minutes apiece, if you wouldn't mind, to get your thoughts out. And so let me call up, we'll have 2 podiums that'll be working to my left and to my right. So in order of your appearance, your arrival, Danielle, James Hills, Carla, James Mackey, Wendy, Amanda, and Martha. James Mackey's not here, okay. So if you could give your name and affiliation for the record, and we'll give everybody about 2 minutes so everybody can get their thoughts out. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. First, thank you for pulling this together. It's really, really needed and very important. So thank you, counselors and the panelists that were here. I'm just sad that they weren't able to be here for a lot of the people who are in the public who are speaking. My name is Danielle Bennett, and I am one of the advocates from the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. I actually am, did this go off? I'm sorry. I am actually one of the people that meet the families within the first 24 to 72 hours of a homicide that happens. I'm going to read a statement and then kind of just really quickly give like a thought. So when a loved one is murdered, survivors are confronted with dozens of decisions about the funeral and burial, and all of which must be made within a matter of days and under great emotional stress. Within the first few hours and days, survivors will always also have dozens of services providers and systems to navigate. They may be of service providers and they may be wondering where to even begin at a time when survivors are doing their best to process the trauma. There's suddenly so much to do. At the Peace Institute, we say, you don't have to go through this alone. We don't promise to have all the answers. However, we will guide you in the right direction for services to help bury your loved one with dignity and respect. Call the Survivors Outreach Services program at the Peace Institute at 617-825-1917. Because I have a short time and I was supposed to be on a panel and I just decided not to, I'm just going to kind of give some of my thoughts as a parent and a community member. In addition to my advocacy, this document that we have that I'm reading from is actually in a folder behind you, so you have that piece of it. As a parent growing up in Boston, my generation, and it's funny, I was sitting in the audience listening to everyone speak, from the commissioner to, BCYF. As a young girl, I had family and community support. I am a product of the Lee School, when it was a good program, which is now the Anthony D. Perkins Center, who was my uncle. Because I had that background, I was able to be supported and have people behind me. We had programs. I know funding is a really, really big issue. So if this is the conversation that we're having and how to keep our youth engaged, not only throughout the summer, but throughout the school year as well, bringing them into the schools. I have a 13-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter who's in college. Neither one of them are community center members because they didn't have that. That was a big missing piece. There's no one for these kids to go to and talk to. There's no one in their schools offering these services to bring them to community centers and letting them know what's out there. That was a really hard thing to hear that it's happening now, but that should have been there all along. My uncle was willing to go against the grain by bringing us to Mass Ave and raise money to take us to Florida, to go horseback riding, to do all those things. There's nothing that's missing. So my generation is alive and well right now. It's our kids who don't have that.
Take your time, Danielle.
I had youth groups. I had workshops. I was taught how to do an interview. When I was in trouble in school, my community came to my school for me. We don't have that now, and that's sad. And as an advocate, that's what I do. It's not a part of my role. I choose to do that. I became an advocate because my cousin was murdered 6 summers ago in front of my aunt's house. Ooh, gosh. I'm sorry. I became an advocate to support families, but the situation behind her murder was because there was a girl who was a setup girl. So who's reaching these young girls with these boyfriends who are asking them to do these horrible things? And who's reaching those young men to talk to them about their life and what they're doing now? That's, the Peace Institute, we are so much more than homicide services. We do everything. We meet people on both sides of that gun to try to prevent things from happening. I know I went way off key on what I was supposed to say, and I was called to do something else. I'm speaking up as a parent, as a community member, as an advocate. We need way more programs and funding into these systems that we have running right now. And it's not about who's not fixing the problem. It's how do we have the players who are actually doing the work, and how do we uplift them and make them feel comfortable that they can come and talk just like this. I am sad that the commission is not here anymore and can't hear people from the community talking. I am sad that the people that are doing BCY programs can't hear me as a product of that. Who my kids didn't, they don't have that. Luckily, my children have me. But there's not all these kids who have parents like myself who have gone through that and come up through the system. I have like 7 uncles and aunts who are on Boston Police right now. Cousins who's gone through the academy, but we come from that as a family. Now, some of these kids don't have that, and if it's not reaching out in their schools and actually going out to them, that's really, really important. And I know it takes money. I was driven from a van every single night from Lee School to my home in Roxbury, a van that someone was volunteering to drive the kids home. That's one way to help that. That's one way to throughout the summer programs and after-school programs, there was an adult who was willing to do that. We don't have that anymore. And maybe it is the money that's missing. And maybe some of the adults, who were then willing to just go the extra mile, who may not be able to, who are not here now to do that. I don't know if any of that makes sense. And I'm sorry I got so emotional, but the conversation, called me to speak something different. So again, I am here as an advocate from the Peace Institute, and I'm also a parent who is listening to what's happening in our streets.
Thank you very much, Danielle. James?
So, there are multiple ways that I can go, and I just want to peel back the onion just a little bit more. We heard from the first panel where the city asserted what it is that they have. It didn't come out today, but I would like to draw your attention at some point to review what the city has referred to as its culmination of a comprehensive public safety plan. When you look at the term culmination, you go to the root word, which is culminate, which is finality, master, done. It is obvious by the past few minutes and the second panel where some things were asserted, there is no culmination of a comprehensive public safety plan. In peeling back that onion, someone talked about politics. Unfortunately, politics is playing a huge, unwarranted, influential role on what's wrong with public safety in Boston. We are not safe. Law enforcement can no longer fall back on a former impact player, can no longer fall back on known to police. Chris Joyce and Mr. Blair were killed in Heath Street. Let me back up. I grew up in Heath Street. I'm from Heath Street. On my way to see that, you talk about trauma, or somebody asks who's dealing with trauma. As someone that works in this space that has serviced families, that has responded to issues where the lack of a real comprehensive public safety plan, I applaud to some extent HHS and the trauma movement. We had a meeting in February. Movement happened. The card that they referred to was designed by a group that I led with the police. So there's been some movement on HHS. Let me back up a little bit. The impact and the trauma I deal with is not responding to the issues. It's the crap. It's the Cindy Diggs referred to some years ago. There's too much yellow tape for all this red tape. The young lady referred to the fact of the people who aren't in the room. Where's Mike Flaherty? Where's the rest of the at-large counselors? I know Ayanna was here. I heard someone checking for an appointment, so she's not here. Certain districts may feel that it's not their priority because it's not an uptick in their area. I'm going to behave. So the points I want to make is when we talk about the politics, Reverend Broderick referred to the disconnectivity. For years, I said on social media, I was coming with a stack of emails and printouts. Counselor, both of y'all came to meetings that we had. You came to the result one. You came to the one with the parents. And y'all heard directly, Kim, you heard, Counselor Janey, you heard directly from the parents what the issues are, what they're dealing with this young lady echoed today. There is a huge disconnect. Let's just keep it real. There are personality conflicts between department and cabinet heads. There's not open sharing of information. You talked about, being transparent and whatnot. Whatever. There is stuff that's already in place. I think it was Marty Martinez that talked about communication and coordination is everything. For years, we've been trying to tell the city there is no interdepartmental protocol for communication. You got BHA placing OP moms in Heath Street and allowing their boyfriends or whatever to come over, giving them access to the roof, and they're shooting off the roof, not even from there. This is the stuff that they came and did the song and dance today about all this, what's going well. There has been movement. That's wonderful. But when it comes to public safety, there has not been. We had that meeting in February where citizens came out. The Mayor's Office of Public Safety has yet to follow up and sit down. I have sent multiple emails and asked. Organizers and activists had asked for a deeper dive around issues. Everybody today talked about the kids in the centers. The kids that go to the centers are not the ones shooting. Nobody talked about SSYI. Roy Martin is not here. He has a list of 200 to 300 young people. They said today there's 45 gangs. How many street workers are there? Come on, y'all have the information. Y'all have the data. There was years ago that there's models. I was one to say, what's new and innovative? What's this comprehensive public safety plan going to, do that's new? Some organizers got on me and said, no, James, there's models that worked in the past. Stop allocating all this goddamn money into law enforcement and reallocate the money so programs can have the support they need to get these young people home, so JRI can build out and have more services. It baffles me. Tim, I worked across the hall, so I know how this stuff works. I know the politics of it. As a unit, where are you all as elected officials? This hearing is wonderful. Wonderful. But we've done it before. I've testified so many times about the same things over and over again. Yes, we had the hearings in the community, but what was done after? What was done? I came here today to put it out there. We are getting to the point where I will commit to organizing people to get people out of office that will not demonstrate their commitment to changing this. I know I'm over my time, but I had to seize the opportunity with a different set of folks. Kim, you went through that the other night. Tim, you already know the work. Matt, I was trying to reach out and connect with you. It didn't happen. I grew up over there. All this cute, dancy, wonderful stuff. Y'all need to go out in the community and I can give y'all numbers. They can give y'all numbers where y'all can go and talk in their homes with these people that don't share the experience of what was being asserted in here today. The main thing I want to ask when you talk about suggestions, and I'll shut up, make them department heads and cabinet heads get in the room with OPS, Office of Public Safety, and make them do their damn job. They need to present by July 1st, everybody talking about the summer. Bring them all together, and there needs to be a new plan with community partners. There was an assertion about our partnerships. I got a thread of emails where I have no response to sit down and follow up. When citizens came out, I'll leave that at that. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, James. Carla? Carla? No Carla? Wendy? No Wendy? Amanda?
You go to that one? You want to go first?
Wendy was on. Oh, Wendy. Oh, that's the same Wendy. Okay.
Okay. Go ahead. Okay, spotlight's on me. Hi, my name is Amanda Govan. I am a single parent. I'm a young mom to a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. I had the pleasure of meeting Kim Janey prior to I'm involved with Reclaim Roxbury. We did a debate and you was involved in that. And I know that there's an issue with funding and community connectivity and things like that. But one thing that I must say, with the revitalization of the city and all the new construction that is going on in the city, all of these new developers coming in, and there are many folks from the outside, from different states, seeing the value and the worth in our land and in our city. For the developers that comes in and wants to build on our city, do we have to make them sign on to an agreement that when you come in and you want to build here in Boston, regardless of what part you want to build in, whether it be Roxbury, Mattapan, Hyde Park, Rosendale, whatever, you have to give a good contribution of your funds, of your developmental funds to the community. And it can't be 5%, 7%, 10%. It has to be in the allots of anywhere from 25 to 30%. We can have these meetings all day long. We can convene and come together on a monthly, yearly basis. But the main issue will always be funding. We all come together. Human beings come together when there's food around, and food does not fall from the sky, is not paid for by the leaves off the trees. But when it comes to actually having funding and have people come in that see the value in this city, they have to contribute as well. New buildings are being built all over the city, especially the Seaport District, but you have to have an investment in the community. There has been a strong disinvestment way before I was even thought of. I was born in 1979, and this has been since the 60s. A lot of vacant lots and vacant land any developer that wants to come in and build, they have to contribute to the community that they're building in. And if they don't want to contribute at least 20%, then you can't build here. That's how I feel as a parent. I've been born and raised in this city. I was raised on Worcester Street. I've been all over the country. I've been able to travel outside the country, and I've known Boston as my home. This part of Roxbury as my home. Yes, people come in for college and stuff like that, and they come and they nest there for a couple of years and they leave, but you have to consider the folks that have been here for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, even the elder folks that have been here that are like 90 and close to 100 years old. We have to have a consideration for the folks that have been here for years and know this city as their home. And with the current process that's being implemented with Plan Dudley and stuff like that, we have to have an understanding that the folks that have been here, the folks that continue to be here, we have to have an avenue for them as well. But with the current development that is going on, either contribute 25 or 30%, or you can't build here. And the money that they contribute, that's your funding for everything that everyone has been asking for JRI and for all of the youth stuff for the summer. The youth stuff year round, not just for the summer. Youth exists year round. We are human beings on a daily basis. It's not just summertime. Safety is not just an implementation for the summertime. It's year round. So it has to be, you come, you want to build here, contribute 30%, or go somewhere else. Thank you.
Martha?
Hello. My name is Marta Rodriguez, and I have been a resident in Jamaica Plain for about 23 years. There's many things that I can say, but I'm just going to focus on something that the commissioner said that I found actually kind of insulting, that, you know, they have been doing everything they can possibly do, and that there's pretty much nothing else that they can do. And now it's about what the community can do. So I've actually had the opportunity to work with many people from Bromley Heath and from the Latin Quarter. And, you know, they're, like Wendy said, there are many families that are prisoners in their own home. That is no way to live. You know, families have actually reached out to members of the community to talk about the different things that are happening to them. You know, being robbed, drugs being sold, the harassment, so many things that are happening that they're afraid to say to the police. Why? Because we have had meetings with the police where they had the audacity to tell these residents that these things are happening because of them, because they don't come forward, because they don't speak up. So now I have asked several officers to clarify that for me. So what happens if someone does come forward? What happens if someone does speak up? What happens when they speak about the people that are selling drugs, the people that are robbing, the people that are doing all these awful things in this community? Do they have consequences? Well, according to them, there's this whole process that doesn't actually guarantee that the person will go to jail, that doesn't guarantee the person, the victim that is coming forward, that that person will be safe. So imagine, you are a prisoner in your own home, you are low income, you have to keep yourself safe and your family, and then you have to choose between coming forward and putting yourself and your family more in danger with no guarantee of something actually happening to these people, and with no guarantee of being protected by the police. So clearly, there are some conversations that need to be had between the community and the police about what it means to come forward, about what it means to come and speak up about these things, and about the consequences that these victims could potentially face. Because then people can make an educated decision about coming forward, and they can choose to put themselves at risk to hopefully see some change. Also, you know, there are police officers that are supposed to be police in the area, walking in their cars and bicycles. None of this is happening. None of it is happening. So why are we still giving money to these people? But they're adding 3 more bicycles for what? To work out their legs? because they're not really doing their job that they're supposed to be doing in this community. The community doesn't trust them. In fact, we've had many community members, and I know these are like really hardcore allegations, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but there's people that have come forward saying that many police officers actually take bribes from the people that are committing the crime. So imagine, not only are they terrified of the actual criminals in the community, but they're also terrified of the people that are supposed to be protecting them. So an honest conversation needs to happen between the commissioner, police officers, and the community. Because even the anonymous line doesn't always remain anonymous. They always put people on blast. And the retaliations that they have to face are pretty freaking scary, but they don't talk about that because when they actually use that line, and it wasn't kept anonymous, they had to face some really bad consequences. So these are things that I didn't hear him talk about. These are things that we need to be talking about. I know this. I don't necessarily work for any organization. I volunteer for many for over 15 years. But I have access to all this information. So you're telling me that you put in all these resources and money and that none of you have access to this information. People know about this. Do something about it. Stop putting money into people and places that are not doing anything for us. Start giving it to the people that are actually working with the community and doing something for the community. And please, please, let's start having honest conversations about how the police can actually do everything they can possibly do to protect our community, and then sit down with us and talk to us about how can we work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I hand it off to the makers for a final statement, I want to thank everybody for being here. I do want a point of clarification. There's not a single hearing that all 13 city councils don't care about or want to be at. The way they're scheduled is the hearing is brought before the board, before the council, and then the makers or the maker works with the chair, which happens to be me today, to schedule the hearing. Councilors have meetings and appointments and family obligations booked out months ahead. Most of us will watch the hearing, and then we'll get some feedback from them at a later date. So I just didn't, or their staff is here taking notes now, and I just thought that that was a little shot that didn't need to be taken. So just a point of clarification on that. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again to my dear colleague and friend, Councilor Janey, for her partnership. And most importantly, thanks to all that stayed for the last 3 hours plus. This was an important conversation, sometimes a difficult conversation to have, but the most effective and worthwhile conversations often are just that. We know that some good things are happening. We know that some better things are happening as it relates to strategies to combat violence this summer, but we also know that there's more work that we need to do. And there are more things that we need to be a little bit more diligent on, and a lot of things that we, by working together, we can really affect some real change. So I wanted to thank all of you, my colleagues, staff, for tremendous work at this. You know, it's important. It was important for Councilor Janey and I to do this now at the very beginning of the summer. But I think some of the action items that we should take away are maybe convening other conversations in the community later this summer. But wanted to thank, again, our panelists, particularly our second panel, and those that offered some testimony after. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Janey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also want to thank Councilor Matt O'Malley for your partnership on this. Certainly, all of you who are still here, our panelists, for your very honest presentations and testimony. I think it's all very helpful as we think about how we tackle these very important issues that many of us are dealing with in our communities. I want to say a special thank you to you, Reverend Willie Broderick, for being very solution-oriented, and I'm looking forward to kind of following up with those in attendance, those on the panels, to see how we can move forward on some of those suggestions. Certainly want to acknowledge you too, Reverend Scott, the people from the second panel, great testimony, all of those who stayed and offered public testimony, and hope that you stay engaged. There's no such thing as solving this by having a hearing or summer programming or just kind of more police or police on bikes. That's not how this works. I'm a big believer, as I said at the very beginning, that this is very much connected to the lack of economic opportunity, to what is happening or not happening in our schools, whether or not we're actually healing from the trauma in our communities, and quite frankly, from systemic oppression and poverty, the effects of poverty in our communities. And so I think we've got a lot of work to do as a council, as a city, and as a community. And I look forward to your continued engagement as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Councilor. It's clear to me that everybody's rowing in the same direction, and we'll be getting together soon. At the end here, it's docket number 0624. Councilors O'Malley and Janey offered the following in order to a hearing to address summer violence in the community and engage in the city of Boston. Docket number 0624 is now adjourned.